Chapter 353. The master knelt on the ground. His face was red and white. Hearing the words, "Ye family," he remembered the true identity of the person in front of him. A sliver of memory that had been hidden for many years slowly rose. It made him feel ashamed, angry, and afraid. The feeling of shame was easy to understand. After all, back then he was just a little beggar by the side of the road. To be able to get to where he was now, it was all because of the Yi family. How had the young lady of the Yi family educated people like him? As for the anger and fear, it came from his natural reaction. It was a kind of shame and anger after being stripped naked. Thinking that the imperial envoy was a descendant of the Yi family, he was afraid that whatever he knew in his head, the other party would also know. Then, how could he use those things to threaten the other party? The other party had cut down Master Shao with one strike. Could he not cut him? "The court has treated you well," Fan Xian looked at him and said each word clearly. "Putting aside you three masters, even a normal treasurer's annual salary is even more than a third-level official in Jingdo. What are you not satisfied with?" A glimmer of coldness flashed through his eyes. "Do you think that the production of the palace treasury all depends on your heads? That the 20 million liang of silver every year blinds your eyes and makes you feel dissatisfied and that you should earn more?" These words hit the bottom of the treasurers' hearts. The palace treasury's annual production was abundant and sold to various countries under heaven. It brought the Qing kingdom a great profit. Although the treasurer's treatment was already very high, compared to that enormous sum of silver, they still felt uncomfortable in their hearts. They always felt that they earned money for the court and should be given more. This was why they privately took bribes, bent the law, and oppressed the common people. Hearing the imperial envoy say this, although the treasurers did not talk back, the meaning appeared in their eyes. Fan Xian laughed coldly and ruthlessly tore away their masks. Lightly mocking, he said, "The problem is, the things you rely on, are they really the things in your heads?" There was a silence. Everyone, including the officials, acknowledged this reality until Fan Xian said, "Don't forget, before the Yi family appeared, what did you know? Did the technology in your heads fall from heaven? Was it taught by the temple?" Fan Xian scolded, "All of you remember it clearly. This is what the Yi family taught you. Without the young lady of the Yi family, you are just trash, continuing to dig the fields and beg. Why did the Yi family build these workshops in the past? I think all of you have forgotten that you are in front of this official. You still want to use the things that the Yi family taught you to threaten this official. Do you have any shame? Do you have any shame?" The officials behind him looked at each other. Although the court had long stopped pursuing the matter of the Yi family and Sir Fan Jr.'s past was gradually known to the people of the world, to speak of the Yi family so openly was still somewhat taboo. Fan Xian could not care so much. He was angry, but he wanted to use this opportunity to clear his name. In this world, no matter what you did, you had to be justified. Fan Xian had scolded the treasurers and beheaded them. Disregarding the benefits, he had first taken the flag on a moral level. The manager of the second workshop finally softened. He knelt on the ground and wailed, "Milord, this lowly one knows his mistake. Please, milord, give this lowly one a chance. Let this lowly one use the skills I learned in the past to serve the court." Although this master was wailing in pain, Fan Xian's sharp eyes did not find any traces of tears on his face. On the contrary, the corners of his lips were pressed tightly together. He couldn't help but smile coldly. He knew that the other still thought he wouldn't continue killing and that the things in his head were still useful. Fan Xian gently clapped his hands. When the clapping was about to end, 4 old men around 50 years old were escorted into the workshop by Overwatch Council officials. These old men were not bystanders. They were the shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall who had come back from the Central Plain via Danzhou. The Overwatch Council officials set out 4 chairs. Fan Xian rose and, expressionless but deliberately respectful, invited the 4 shopkeepers to sit. The officials, treasurers, and workers were all confused. They wondered who these old men who seemed like they would be blown over by the slightest breeze had the right to sit side by side with the imperial envoy. Although the deputy Ma Jie didn't say anything, he was muttering in his heart. He thought, "Even I am standing behind the imperial envoy, how dare these commoners?" Fan Xian's finger slid across the robe on his body and dipped into some icy rainwater. He smeared it between his brows and slowly rubbed it. He asked, "Do you still recognize who these 4 are?" Nearly 20 years had passed since the Yi family's collapse. The workers in the palace treasury workshop were no longer the same as before. Even the treasurers had never seen the high and mighty 23-head shopkeepers of the Yi family, so they did not recognize who these 4 people were. Even though there were old men from back then, they were too far away and could not distinguish clearly. On the other hand, the second workshop's manager, who was kneeling on the ground, slowly swept his hesitant gaze across the four people's faces. He lowered his head and thought for a long while. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and was so shocked that his legs gave way. His originally kneeling posture, he immediately sat down on the muddy water. It had been 20 years since they had seen each other. As a small helper of the Yi family, it took him a long time to remember who the people sitting in front of him were, the old shopkeepers of the Yi family. The second workshop master's body began to tremble. Only now did he know why Fan Xian was so fearless, why he had forced him, the treasurers, to rebel, and why he did not care about what they remembered in their minds. He had brought the old shopkeepers who had been under house arrest in Jingdo to the palace treasury. What kind of people were the old shopkeepers? They were the first group of students of the young lady of the Yi family. They were also the masters of all the teachers and helpers of the Yi family. They were also the ancestors of the present palace treasury treasurers. With such a group of old men at his side, the imperial envoy did not care about the problem of lost craftsmanship, nor did he have to worry about the quality of the palace treasury's products. Truthfully speaking, the palace treasury had been single-handedly built by these old shopkeepers. How could they not be managed? Thinking this through, the master's face was full of despair, but there was still a glimmer of hope in the depths of his heart. Opening his mouth, he struggled to crawl toward Fan Xian and wailed, "Teacher, please ask for leniency on behalf of your disciple." Everyone was startled, and Fan Xian was also slightly surprised. He knew that this person was not asking for leniency from him. Following the master's gaze, he found that he was looking at Seventh Yi. He couldn't help tilting his head and asking curiously, "Seventh Yi, was he your former disciple?" Seventh Yi's face darkened. He stared at the master's face and said in a raspy voice full of resentment, "He learned from me for a few days." Fan Xian smiled slightly. He understood Seventh Yi's feelings. After the Yi family collapsed, the 23 old shopkeepers had been captured by the court from various places and placed under house arrest in Jingdo. Some of their disciples had resisted and died, while others struggled at death's door. Of course, this was all people's own choice in the face of impending disaster. No one blamed them. However, for someone like the second master who had climbed to such a high position, his behavior back then must have been very bad. Hearing the second master call out, "Teacher," the third master, who had been standing silently to the side, froze to the side like he had been struck by lightning. Looking at the four old men sitting beside the imperial envoy, he completely couldn't believe his ears. The remaining members of the Yi family among the treasurers confirmed the identities of these four people. Amidst their shock, there were also some people who still had old memories. They all stood up and knelt in front of the four old shopkeepers with shock, joy, and fear. Fourth Master. Uncle 12th, I am Zhuzi. Greetings, old shopkeepers. Back then, I was a worker in the Chuzhou branch doing odd jobs. Although most of the treasurers did not have much of a relationship with these four old shopkeepers, the palace treasury meeting to recognize relatives was already bustling with activity. Fan Xian's face darkened and he said in a cold voice, "I'll come back to recognize relatives in a bit." Although his expression was unhappy, his heart had calmed down. With the 13 spies as deputy masters and the remaining power of these old shopkeepers, his plan to reform the palace treasury should be able to proceed smoothly. Meeting again after 20 years, the atmosphere in the workshop immediately became somewhat sad. This kind of sadness perfectly diluted the earlier tension. Only the officials of the transport company felt uneasy, and some of the Xinjiang people laughed coldly to themselves. If the scene in front of them got back to Jingdo, the emperor would probably have some opinions about Commissioner Fan. The second master lowered his head and knelt on the ground. He also felt slightly comforted in his heart. Looking at this situation, at most he would receive some punishment. In a moment he would desperately admit his mistake. For the sake of the old Yi family, the imperial envoy probably wouldn't make things too difficult for him. He glanced sideways at the body of Master Xiao in the distance at the mouth of the furnace and felt a lingering fear in his heart. Fortunately, Xiao Jing had stepped forward first. He also felt some sympathy for that bastard. He thought to himself that a person who had no connection to the old Yi family had indeed died cleanly under the hands of the imperial envoy. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian had repulsed the treasurers, a faint smile rose to his face and he said, "Take this person away and behead him." "Yes, sir." The second master raised his head and looked around with a perplexed gaze. For a moment he didn't understand who to behead. Shouldn't things be like this? It was not until he was dragged up by the Overwatch Council officials that he realized the imperial envoy still wanted to kill him. He had wanted to open his mouth to cry out for his innocence, but a clump of dirt blocked his mouth. Seeing the Overwatch Council officials drag the limp master out of the workshop and the water stain on the ground, everyone in the workshop, regardless of whether they were officials or commoners, shopkeepers or treasurers, became deathly silent. They all turned their gazes toward the imperial envoy sitting in the middle. It was as if Fan Xian could not feel the countless gazes and lowered his head slightly. Outside the workshop came the muffled sound of a metal weapon striking a neck, as well as a muffled grunt. There was an uproar in the workshop and immediately sank into a death-like silence. Everyone knew that the second master had died so simply. The silence did not last long. The third master, with his hands tied behind his back, smiled self-mockingly. His face was pale with despair. Very consciously he walked in front of Fan Xian. He knew that he had no chance of survival. Since the imperial envoy had used the name of suppressing the strike, then he would not be stupid enough to open a court to investigate the case. He also did not need any evidence. He had to kill the three of them on the spot to establish his might. Only then could the four old shopkeepers regain control of the palace treasury technicians. Two of the masters of the three workshops had already died, so he was the third. Fan Xian glanced at him and furrowed his brows slightly. The third master looked at him and gritted his teeth for a moment. He then suddenly said, "I have my own path to death. I don't blame you for digging this pit for me to jump into. However, before I die, I beg you to allow me to ask something." Fan Xian raised his brows and said, "Ask." The third master no longer looked at him. He tilted his head and gazed at the Yi family's 12th shopkeeper beside him. His lips trembled for a while before he said in a trembling voice, "12th uncle, my teacher, is he well in the capital? I am unfilial and have not been filial these years." "You are?" 12th Yi blinked his slightly muddy eyes and asked this master with confusion. 7th Yi sighed and said from the side, 13th's eldest disciple. "Back then you had the best relationship with 12th, so he came to ask you." 12th Yi said in shock, "Hu Jinlin? You're still alive? We all thought you died back then." The old shopkeeper suddenly remembered that he was surrounded by court officials. His words were not quite right, so he quickly shut his mouth. Hu Jinlin's face was full of shame. He lowered his head and refused to speak. 12th Yi sighed and said, "The young lady once said that living is better than dying. Us old bones are all struggling at death's door. How can we blame you? Only you asked 13th. The shopkeeper shook his head and said, "He already passed away a few years ago. Of the 23 people who entered the capital, there are only 15 left now." Hearing that his teacher had passed away, Hu Jinlin completely forgot that he was about to die as well. A great sorrow appeared on his face. Fan Xian listened quietly to the side. He also felt a strange emotion in his heart. The elders of the Yi family were gradually being battered by the wind and rain. The year he first entered Jingdo, there were 23 shopkeepers and 17 people. In less than 2 years, another 2 had died. He looked at the materials piled around the workshop and abruptly became distracted. He thought to himself that time flowed like water. When would he be able to rebuild the name of the Yi family? When would he be able to have the people who should die die and have the people who should live again in the hearts of the Qing people? In a very short time, he had already woken up. Looking at the third master in front of him, he said mockingly, "Although I don't know if you are acting or if you really still have feelings for me, I never planned on killing you. So don't think that you can live because I'm soft-hearted." Hu Jinlin, who thought he was going to die, had no hope of getting lucky after the tragic deaths of his 2 masters. Suddenly hearing these words, on the contrary, he was so shocked he didn't know what to say. Fan Xian said expressionlessly, "Those who are guilty are beheaded, and those who have committed minor crimes are forgiven. I'm not here to settle old grudges." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 354. The reason Fan Xian did not kill Hu Jinlin was very simple. The third workshop had always been jointly managed by the Palace Treasury and the Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They were specifically responsible for the research of military equipment and ships. The Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been Fan Xian's fellow disciples, so they understood the situation of the third workshop the best. Hu Jinlin was wholeheartedly engrossed in studying the blueprints the mistress of the Yi family had left behind. His personality was wooden and dull. Although he had embezzled a great deal of silver, he had never done something that Fan Xian could not tolerate, such as taking over fields and bullying women. Compared to the masters of the first and second workshops, there was indeed a reason for him not to be killed. Of course, the most important reason was that Fan Xian did not want to kill him. From another angle, it showed that he was not a righteous official. The master of the third workshop was taken away. There were still many treasures left in the workshop. These people looked at each other. At the beginning of the strike, everyone was secretly anxious in their hearts, but they still had some confidence. It was not the first time the treasurers had banded together to oppose the officials of the court's transport company. In the past, as long as their requests were not excessive, the matter would always be resolved peacefully. In their eyes, they only wanted to protect the silver they had extorted and harshly withheld over these years. It was indeed a reasonable request. However, no one had thought that the new imperial envoy would be so vicious and merciless. After pointing out the nature of the palace treasury and inviting out the 4 old Yi family shopkeepers, the treasurers all knew that all of their trump cards had lost all effect in front of this young official. At this moment, the treasurers were just a flock of chickens waiting to be slaughtered. It was just a matter of how many Fan Xian wanted to slaughter. Not many. Following Su Wenmao's naming and statement of crimes, another 3 treasurers were pulled out from the crowd. These 3 treasurers had done many evil things and secretly colluded with the officials of the Suzhou government. The matters they had handled had violated countless Qing laws. Killing them 16 or 17 times was not enough. Fan Xian accepted the file in Su Wenmao's hands and glanced at the treasurers in front of him who had wet his pants and couldn't even stand steadily. He furrowed his brows and said, "You're the one who married 12 concubines?" The treasurers didn't even have the strength to nod. He was terrified. Fan Xian shook his head and mockingly said, "Marrying 12 concubines only shows that you are rich and have a lot of confidence in the bed between husband and wife. But out of the 12 concubines, 9 of them were taken by force. That is very shameful. Stealing someone's wife and killing their own husband? Impressive, impressive. You are even more arrogant than the most famous hedonistic playboy in the capital." Although the other 2 treasurers did not commit such a crime, they still deserved to die. Fan Xian waved his hand. The Overwatch Council officials dragged the 3 treasurers out. Following the sound of 3 knives and 3 wretched cries, 3 lives were lost. Killing people without a change in expression was something the Overwatch Council officials could do. Even the soldiers by the side of the workshop could barely do it. However, the officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company could not take it anymore. Their backs were drenched in sweat. Some of them smelled the blood inside and outside the workshop and wanted to vomit. Deputy Ma Jie was still relatively calm, but the sweat on his face began to drip furiously. Pitifully, he moved closer to Fan Xian's ear and said, "Sir, in a few days the Palace Treasury will open for bidding. Killing people is inauspicious. Killing people is inauspicious." Naturally, there was no way to save the people who had been killed, but Ma Jie was afraid that Fan Xian's vicious nature would explode and continue to kill. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Sir Ma, don't worry. 6 years ago, Ma Yu, the eldest princess, personally came to the palace treasury for the last time. How many treasurers did she kill?" He extended his thumb and pinky finger and said, 6. I am a junior, so naturally I won't kill too many. I've already killed 5. That's enough." Hearing these 2 words, the hearts of the officials behind him relaxed involuntarily. The treasurers in front of them were wild with joy. Regardless of who it was, they were all frightened by the 5 bloody heads until their legs felt weak. Only Su Wenmao suppressed the displeasure in his heart after a moment of surprise and didn't say anything. Deputy Ma Jie furrowed his brows, thinking that there was more to the imperial envoy's words. The eldest princess had killed 6 and he had only killed 5. If this matter went wrong in the future and the imperial censors reported him for violating court law and killing indiscriminately, it looked like there would be an explanation. It seemed that although this imperial envoy was young, his thoughts were ruthlessly meticulous. He could not miss the path that his cousin Ren Shaoan had painstakingly paved for him. After thinking through this matter, Deputy Ma Jie solemnly agreed to Fan Xian's following appointments and measures without a trace of evasion or conflict. Although some of the officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company were unhappy, since the head and deputy had set the rules, they could not oppose it. In Fan Xian's plan, the masters of the 3 large workshops were either dead or imprisoned. It just so happened to free up the 3 most important positions for the 3 old Yi family shopkeepers to temporarily hold. Additionally, the traitor treasurers who had reported their colleagues' crimes to the Overwatch Council would take on the positions as assistants. It could be considered making up for the old shopkeepers' lack of familiarity with the palace treasury after not returning for 20 years. killing first and planting spies among them. With these arrangements, the entire group of treasurers could be considered stabilized. In the future, the traitor treasurers only had to guard against the treasurers below them feeling discontent and purposely picking on their mistakes. When they did things, they had to be particularly careful. Once the group stood, these deputy masters would be particularly vicious and stare at the subordinate treasurers. The two clashed. Presumably, the things that Fan Xian did not want to see would gradually decrease. 3-day order, there's still half a day, Fan Xian said. Don't look at me, I know you can all read. Go back. Some of the workshops that you should be in are hundreds of li away. If you don't hurry home to raise the money and then return to the workshop to work, are you going to continue standing here like clay figurines? Fan Xian said, those who didn't die, spit out the silver and give me a clear account of what you have done. Write a note yourself. His voice gradually became cold at the end. After saying this, he walked out of the large workshop under the terrified gazes of the treasurers. The soldiers General Yi led gradually dispersed. The Overwatch Council officials all returned to their positions. It was still unknown who the spies placed in the workshops were. The officials whispered among themselves, but no one knew what they were talking about. The workers had watched a great show. After the treasurers had been taught a lesson through blood and fire, they became particularly obedient and terrified. The heavy rain outside gradually stopped. A lively palace treasury strike incident ended in such an absurd and nonsensical manner under Fan Xian's knife and the shopkeepers' old faces. The treasurers and officials returned the silver smoothly. After Fan Xian had examined them one by one, he also gently raised his noble hand. As long as they did not hide it too far, he left them some face and did not squeeze everyone dry of their family property. Being an official was only for money. If they were all swept clean, the officials of the palace treasury would not be able to show it on the surface, but they would certainly have a great knot in their hearts. When they did things, they would be incomparably lazy. Even with all 5 fingers spread open and pulling at the silver, the Yaman's 3-day order still recovered a large amount of silver. Even though Fan Xian's family was extremely wealthy and he had seen a lot of things in this life, looking at the number on the account, he still sucked in a cold breath in shock. He felt a faint regret in his heart. This matter had become a big deal. It was impossible to hide it from Jingdo. Under the eyes of everyone, the silver that was cleared, other than the wages owed to the workers these years, had to be sent into the palace treasury's special accounts. It was impossible for him to move it personally. If he had known earlier that the treasurers were the fattest corrupt officials in the world, perhaps Fan Xian would not have organized such a purge. Instead, he would have directly had the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council be thieves. Other than things like land deeds, he would have stolen the rest of the banknotes into his own private hands. He was currently short of silver. If he could have this large sum of silver, he would no longer need the help of the North, and it would prevent new problems from arising in the process. More importantly, it would also allow his father to stay out of the matter, so that he would not be implicated in the future bidding. Returning to Haitang, after that day of the strike, Fan Xian returned to the manor and bitterly complained to this girl. Other than righteousness, he analyzed the current situation in detail and warned her that the Qing Emperor probably already knew that the two of them were together. If she dared to go peep in the workshops in front of the Tiger Guards, he probably wouldn't be able to sit in his position in the palace treasury for more than 2 days. If he couldn't stay in the palace treasury, how much more silver would Northern Qi have to fork out in a year? Haitang was a bit innocent. She thought that she was just bored, so she wanted to go for a walk. How did it involve some conspiracy? Fan Xian was a bit suspicious. On the surface he didn't bring up the matter again, but in his heart he was still a bit uncomfortable. Fortunately, the palace treasury affairs were gradually moving on the right track. This process only needed a few days. It had to be said that Fan Xian's cold-faced killing during the strike had deeply intimidated everyone. Furthermore, the old shopkeeper's reappearance and Fan Xian's clever arrangements had all played a large role. The workers once again received the wages they had worked for many years. The girls who had been forcefully taken also returned to their homes. The entire palace treasury floor was filled with an atmosphere of joy. Amidst the joyous atmosphere, there were also some discordant notes mixed in. Although Fan Xian's thoughts were meticulous and had long guessed some of it, he had used the power of the government ahead of time to suppress those bitter stories from happening. The Qing Kingdom's common people's own stories were always complicated. The common people did not like those women, but they were used to living happy lives with the little treasurer. Once the situation changed, they were not used to it. The treasurers did not have sex in the middle of the night, so there were not many cases of forcefully taking concubines. Although there were not many cases, it involved matters between men and women. It created a bad influence among the people. Fan Xian was vexed, but he didn't have any good ideas. It was difficult for an upright official to resolve family matters. He, a ruthless official, was also not that strong, so he could only toss it aside. However, these were just small interludes. On a larger level, the authority of the new head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, Imperial Envoy Fan Xian, had already been established. Furthermore, in the hearts of the tens of thousands of low-level workers in the Palace Treasury, he had firmly forged an image of being upright and outspoken, incorruptible and wise. Presently, he no longer needed the help of the 8th Bureau. With his reputation as a civil and military official, Fan Xian had long become familiar with these methods. The Palace Treasury gradually calmed down. However, the strike had ended, but Fan Xian's plan had only just begun. To beat the snake to scare it, one half of the two-headed snake had been ruthlessly killed by him. With the other injured, it was time to begin moving. "Is there any new news from Ziyue?" Fan Xian asked casually as he sat in a chair and looked with narrowed eyes at today's council reports. Su Wenmao replied, "Not so fast. According to your orders, even if those Xinjiang officials send the news out, it will take at least a month for them to come and go." Fan Xian sighed. The imperial censors in the court do things too slowly. Su Wenmao smiled bitterly, thinking, how could there be someone like the commissioner in the world who waited for the imperial censorate's imperial censors to come and report him? It was only because his background was strong enough that he could sit so calmly. "We can't wait anymore. Tomorrow we'll capture those people," Fan Xian said. The target of these words was, of course, the trusted officials Xinjiang had left in the palace treasury. At the beginning of the 3-day order, these officials had secretly stirred up the emotions of the treasurers and incited them to oppose Fan Xian. After Fan Xian demonstrated his bloody methods, these officials were as happy as if they had eaten a sweet jujube. Throughout the night, they thought of ways to send out memorials without asking. Of course, it was to report to the officials of the eldest princess faction in Jingdo. At the beginning, Fan Xian had allowed the treasurers to link up for 3 days and finally form a strike to force the emperor to abdicate. It was for the sake of making the pustules in the palace treasury grow more plentiful and to see who was playing tricks. Before and after, the Overwatch Council's secret agents watched the many officials in the transport company with great caution. These people had no way of escaping the net Fan Xian had laid out. "Let's do it," Fan Xian said with a pained smile. "We're all leaving. We can't keep them here to eat porridge." Su Wenmao made a sound of acknowledgement and asked with confusion, "Sir, why didn't you cover up the news at the beginning? After all, there was a strike this time. Once the court in Jingdo discussed it, if Xinjiang did something else, I'm afraid your days would not be easy." Fan Xian fell silent. His fingers gently tapped against the armrest of the chair. This was a very common behavior when he was thinking about a problem. After thinking for a while, he decided to explain a bit more to his trusted aide. He raised his head and explained, "The palace treasury is divided into 2 parts. The workshops are the foundation, and the export merchants are the hands and feet. If I want to break someone's hands and feet, I have to first lay down a solid foundation. I have never been used to planning for a situation that takes too long, so I chose to force these people in the palace treasury to overreact first. Only then can I strike heavily and find an excuse to chase the Xinjiang officials out." Su Wenmao nodded, but he thought that this could not explain his earlier question. Looking at the commissioner's expression, he knew he had a sense of propriety, so he listened patiently. "I want to force the enemies in the palace treasury to act," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. "Isn't the eldest princess also waiting for me to force her? Given her eyes in the court and palace, how could she not know that the old shopkeepers had followed me to Jiangnan? And she has never told this matter to the officials in the palace. It is clear that she does not want those officials to know my bottom line and not dare to stand out bravely. Think about it, if everyone knew that the old shopkeepers were with us, how could this strike have happened? Naturally, it would not have happened." Su Wenmao furrowed his brows. "If they knew that you had old teachers from Qingyu Hall at your side, those treasurers would not have dared to stand out and make irresponsible remarks. But the question is, why would the eldest princess hide this information and wait for the palace treasury officials to secretly make connections, thus giving you a good opportunity to establish your might? If she had explained it clearly beforehand, the treasurers would certainly have been much more well-behaved. Those Xinjiang officials would have also calmed down and not let us find any reason to do so." Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. "This eldest princess stands much higher than most people. Yes, it looks like she has given me a chance to establish my might and even allowed me to intimidate a group of officials in the palace treasury. However, in the way I handled this matter, I had no choice but to borrow more of the people and power of the old Yi family. I had to kill people to establish my might. My methods would appear more violent and unscrupulous. He continued to explain, when I first entered the palace treasury I killed 5 treasurers. If this news got to Jingdo, the court would certainly not have a good evaluation of me. As for using the old shopkeepers to control the palace treasury, it would touch on some people's taboos in the palace. The eldest princess covered this pot of porridge and waited for it to boil. It looked like she wanted me to eat it, but in reality she wanted to burn my mouth. Su Wenmao worriedly said, "Speaking of which, when you handled the strike that day, your words seemed to touch on some taboos." Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. Su Wenmao's face was full of seriousness. After the strike, killing people, and the old shopkeepers get back to Jingdo, no matter what, the court will reprimand you. At the very least, your actions are reckless and careless, unbearable. He closed his mouth, but Fan Xian smiled and continued, "Unbearable? At the very worst, they could secretly say that I have different aspirations and still remember the Yi family in the past and so on." Su Wenmao paused and immediately understood what Commissioner Fan feared the most in his life. He involuntarily sucked in a breath of cold air. Only now did he finally feel the eldest princess methods. She had not done anything. She had only secretly helped Fan Xian hide the news of the old shopkeepers heading south. She had been able to place Fan Xian on the mouth of a very dangerous volcano. Since you understood the plan so well, back then, you should have brought out the old shopkeepers at the first opportunity. You should have been more cautious in your actions. He gathered his courage and admonished Fan Xian. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "The eldest princess calculated that I had to intensify the conflict in order to take control of the palace treasury as quickly as possible. As for the aftermath, it is something I cannot care about right now. So, on this point, even if she watches coldly from Jingdo, I still have to do it." He smiled coldly and said, "As for the trusted officials of the palace treasury being dug out by me because of this, presumably, she also knows that with the help of the Overwatch Council, these people will not be of any use in the next few years. On the contrary, they will bring her unwanted trouble. Since they are already useless people, why would she care about their life or death? They are just a few abandoned chess pieces to give me some trouble before they die. Since no matter what she does, it is impossible to stop my complete takeover. Of course, the eldest princess is willing to see that my takeover will cause some trouble and bring me some hidden worries in the future." The so-called hidden worries in these words were naturally the noble's understanding of Fan Xian. Perhaps there would be some subtle changes because of the palace treasury matter. Who knew if the cold-blooded side Fan Xian showed in handling the palace treasury matter would touch the Empress Dowager's sensitive nerve or make the Empress and the Crown Prince think of the Yi family in the past. Making connections was like a venomous snake that ate at one's heart and soul. Before Fan Xian had enough power to deal with them, perhaps they would become wary. The Empress Dowager, the eldest princess, and the Empress were a group of women in the harem. The Crown Prince and the second prince were a pair of quarrelsome lovers. If they once again united because of Fan Xian's existence, and if the emperor would have some kind of suspicion toward Fan Xian, the eldest princess would laugh. The eldest princess should laugh and Fan Xian should cry. In the palace treasury matter, the so-called, with the shopkeeper in hand, I have the world. The eldest princess had to accept this reality, so she only wanted to obtain some benefits from it. What should I do next? Fan Xian lowered his head and said faintly and insipidly, "Nothing much." According to the director's words, the eldest princess's vision is still limited to one palace. If the imperial censorate really accuses me this time, I'm afraid she will suffer a loss. Su Wenmao looked at him with disbelief. Fan Xian raised his head and a confident smile rose to his face. Since the emperor has given the old shopkeeper to me, it means that, in a short amount of time, he believes in my loyalty. If I go to Jiangnan to take over the palace treasury, it will damage the eldest princess's face. If the eldest princess maintains her silence at this time, then it's fine. If I do anything wrong in cleaning up the palace treasury, the Jingdo court officials will rise up and attack me. The emperor can't help but be suspicious. As for the problem of the old Yi family, it won't affect me too much. I want this pot of porridge in the palace treasury to be cooked quickly. The eldest princess likes me to use a fierce fire, but I hope she will secretly help me use a fierce fire. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Although my actions in the palace treasury are impudent and worthy of suspicion, I did not purposely hide it. Naturally, the emperor believes in my sincerity. Although the eldest princess looks on coldly from the side, she is scheming without authorization. This is the so-called insincerity. He finally explained, any scheme at the final stage only depends on the emperor's mood and closeness. I have always been completely honest with the emperor. He didn't know if these words were to convince Su Wenmao or to deceive him. In this battle, Fan Xian knew that his son-in-law had to obtain victory. As his son, he also had to obtain victory. After the emperor had established the second prince as an enemy for the crown prince, he had now successfully established Fan Xian as the most valiant whetstone. The eldest princess only saw the pressure Fan Xian's rise brought to the two princes and the empress dowager and empress in the palace. She did not see clearly that this kind of pressure was secretly cultivated by the Qing emperor. This was what Fan Xian had said earlier through Qin Pingping's mouth. The eldest princess's vision was still limited. It was not the limitations of history but the limitations of her butt. After all, she was not an emperor who sat on the dragon chair and looked down on the world. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 355. It was the middle of March. Spring had long swept across the world from the north to the south. Regardless of whether it was Shangjing in the north or Jingdou in the Qing kingdom, they were all enveloped in a flourishing scene. In the land of Jiangnan, the green water rippled and the green mountains hid each other. Along the river, the willow trees sprouted tender green branches and wrote the word vitality. The palace treasury was southwest of Jiangnan Road, so it could not escape the good fortune of nature. In just a few days, up and down the river, inside and outside the workshops, green grass and light pink flowers grew, decorating the originally dull yamen and workshops. It greatly weakened the hard and cold atmosphere. Amidst the peace, the officials who came to the yamen for work had faces full of smiles and raised their hands in greeting at the yamen door. The reign of blood and foul wind had already passed. Tomorrow, the imperial envoy would return to Suzhou to preside over the matter of the palace treasury opening for the new year. The mood of these officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company was very relaxed. After opening the yamen to discuss matters, Fan Xian sat in the middle seat and gave a brief summary of the future arrangements. However, there were no trusted aides among these people, so what he talked about was the usual routine, such as the arrangements for the various workshops. Other than reiterating the Qing laws, he also mentioned that the court had specially revised the rules for the palace treasury. They could not be disobeyed. Regardless of whether it was wages or salaries, they all had to be distributed promptly. The daily security and security work also had to be more vigilant. Hearing the imperial envoy say this, the officials also agreed. With those 5 heads in front of them, no one would be stupid enough to contradict him face to face. Fan Xian arranged for Su Wenmao to stay. However, he did not have an official position in the transport company, so he temporarily moved his subordinates to the 4th bureau. Together with Danda, he led the Overwatch Council officials and secret agents in the palace treasury. The officials knew that after Fan Xian finished presiding over the New Year opening of the palace treasury in Suzhou, he would go to Hangzhou to settle down. This was a rule that had been established many years ago. The head of the transport company would not live in the palace treasury. Thus, Su Wenmao, who stayed in the palace treasury, was equivalent to the imperial envoy spokesperson. He could not be treated lightly. Thus, everyone quickly stood and greeted Su Wenmao. As they met, Fan Xian's brows furrowed slightly. He quietly said to the deputy beside him, "Ma Jie, I am going to do what we talked about last night." This was a superficial respect for the deputy envoy. Ma Jie, however, had a bitter expression on his face as he shook his head repeatedly. A strange light flashed through the eyes of General Yi, who was sitting to Fan Xian's right. He didn't know what the imperial envoy was up to this time that he hadn't been notified. His question was quickly answered. Su Wenmao put on a false smile and walked to the front of the hall. He raised his hands in salute to everyone present. After returning the greeting, he quietly said, "Today we have investigated the matter of some officials in the Palace Treasury Transport Company secretly doing something improper. They incited the treasurers to cause trouble and shook the foundation of the Palace Treasury. Everyone please excuse us." Following these words, 7 or 8 Overwatch Council officials walked out from the side of the yamen and rudely asked the officials who had been sitting in their chairs to leave their seats. They rudely removed their official hats. These officials flew into a rage. As they pushed and refused, they shouted, "How dare you!" Once the other officials of the transport company saw that they weren't targeting them, they felt slightly more at ease. However, they knew the methods of the Overwatch Council. The civil officials of the Qing court had a natural alliance in front of the Overwatch Council. They quickly stood and said to Fan Xian seriously, "Sir, what is the reason for this?" In reality, no one was an idiot. They all knew that the people Fan Xian was dealing with, other than Wuxia, were all trusted aides that the eldest princess of Xinjiang had placed in the palace treasury these past 10 years. The imperial envoy's actions were nothing more than to dig out the roots of the predecessors and then plant his own saplings in their place. However, this matter concerned the face of the officials. If the Yamen was so fierce in arresting people, the officials would not be able to keep their faces. It was inevitable that they would argue with Fan Xian a little. Fan Xian glanced at the officials and warmly said, "Everyone, there is no need to be suspicious, but there is also no need to plead for leniency. I will definitely take down these officials." General Yi, who sat to his right, had an ugly expression. He glanced at Deputy Ma Jie beside him and found that although he could not hide his awkwardness, there was no shock in his eyes. Presumably he had already been informed by Fan Xian last night. Thinking of this, General Ye's mood began to become heavy. In a muffled voice, he reported, "Sir, these officials have served in the transport company for a long time and have always restrained themselves to serve the public good. If we just take them like this, I'm afraid, it will not be justifiable." Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled. "Restrain themselves to serve the public good? I'm afraid it's not." General Ye's expression darkened slightly. "Even if there are occasional improprieties, you have already given the 3-day order. These officials have already acted according to your orders. Since it is clear that they will not be punished, they will not be punished." Fan Xian lowered his head. He knew why General Yi and the other officials had jumped out to oppose him today. The reason was actually very simple. Last time, when he suppressed the treasurer's strike, this general knew he could not stop Fan Xian's methods. Furthermore, the hat Fan Xian used to suppress him was large enough. The court could not afford to lose a single day of work in the palace treasury. Capturing these officials this time had touched on everyone's most sensitive psychological defenses. They were terrified that he, as the imperial envoy who also held the position of commissioner of the Overwatch Council, would use this as an excuse to weave a large net and flip over the entire transport company, injuring himself. For General Yi, his family had been pushed hard by the emperor. Additionally, with Yi Linger's relationship with the second prince, there were already faint signs of leaning in that direction. Although General Yi had never received any secret letters from the Yi family in Dingzhou, he knew that Fan Xian's capture today was to dig out all of the eldest princess trusted aides in the palace treasury. Unconsciously, he wanted to save something for the eldest princess. If he allowed Fan Xian to grow in the palace treasury, General Yi was worried that his future days would not be easy. Fan Xian did not explain anything. He only pulled out a file from his clothes and handed it to General Yi. General Yi was slightly surprised. He accepted the open file and looked at it closely. His expression gradually darkened. He saw that on the file were all the shady and illegal activities of the officials who had been captured. Most importantly, the crime on it was not on the so-called corruption. Instead, it was on the dishonorable roles these officials had played in the labor unrest. All of the evidence, including the traitorous confessions of the treasurers, were clear. For example, when an official had spoken to which treasurers, the locations and people were all clearly written. The attack was ruthless and accurate. It was truly the Overwatch Council's top-notch methods. Looking at each line of evidence on the file, this general's heart couldn't help but gradually grow cold. He thought that the imperial envoy had only been in the palace treasury for a few days. How could he have investigated all of the transport company's ins and outs so clearly? Furthermore, how did the people of the Overwatch Council know so clearly about the secret conversations between Xinjiang's trusted aides and the treasurers? Could it be that there were Overwatch Council spies among the treasurers? Thinking of this, General Yi remembered the legendary terror of the Overwatch Council. Those spies who had already been described by the people as being like poisonous snakes in the night, were everywhere. He involuntarily began to worry about himself. Would there also be Overwatch Council spies in his manor? However, as the general in charge of the palace treasury's defense, he was not very afraid of the Overwatch Council. First, he was a third-level official. The Overwatch Council did not have the power to arrest him without asking for an edict. Second, as a member of the military, regardless of faction, the Overwatch Council saw the power of the Qing Kingdom's military and had to give them some face. On the matter of the labor unrest, General Yi thought he had performed well enough. Today it truly involved the eldest princess face as well as the matter of the princes in Jingdo. He forcefully resisted the unease in his heart and stood. He bowed to Fan Xian and said sincerely, "Sir, this? After all, he was a general, so he didn't know how to organize his pleas. Fan Xian smiled and looked at him. He shook his head and said, "There's no need to plead." General Yi was terrified that Ding Zhou was still not willing to send a message. He had no idea which side to stand on, which was why he had sunk into the difficult situation he was in. However, Fan Xian had acted first. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to say, "Sir, these people are all officials of the transport company. I wonder if you want to take them as the head of the transport company or as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council." In a low voice he said, "Sir, even if the Imperial Envoy takes people and the evidence is there, if you want to investigate the case, it will take many days to open the court. The palace treasury is about to open." Fan Xian glanced at him and was surprised by the other party's courage. After thinking for a moment he understood. If he wanted to take these officials, the method he used was very particular. If he used his identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council to investigate the case, then once it got back to Jingdo, it would draw the court's attention. The elders in court would probably think he was targeting the eldest princess or something. If he used his identity as the head of the transport company or the imperial envoy to investigate the case, he could not delay this any longer. Who was Fan Xian? How could he care about the discussion in Jingdo? He smiled and said, "General Yi, don't worry too much. I have always believed in Qing law and will not act recklessly. Today I have taken these officials. For the sake of fairness, I will not personally investigate the case." General Yi was slightly startled. As long as you don't personally investigate the case, no matter who investigates, it will depend on Jingdo's inclination. With Fan Xian's promise he could answer to Jingdo, so he hesitantly retreated. However, he was curious as to why Fan Xian was not personally investigating the case. Was he going to lock these officials up in the palace treasury? They couldn't keep them locked up forever. The court would eventually send an inquiry. "I will take them with me on the road," Fan Xian said. The palace treasury is also a part of the court. Although it has never had much interaction with the officials in court in terms of rules, it is still managed by Jiangnan Road. He gazed at the many uneasy officials in the hall and comfortingly said, "I know what everyone is worried about. Don't worry, I am not a vengeful person. Just as I said to General Yi earlier, for the sake of fairness, I will not personally interrogate these people. Instead, I will hand them over to the governor of Suzhou." He smiled slightly and said, "With Sir Shui investigating the case, presumably no one will have any more misgivings." He looked at the eldest princess trusted aide who was still confronting the Overwatch Council officials in the hall. A glimmer of anger flashed across the corner of his lips. When did catching people become a game of eagle catching chicks? Su Wenmao's face reddened slightly as he glared fiercely at his subordinates. The Overwatch Council officials felt ashamed in their hearts. They went forward and used a few Foshan shadowless kicks, kicking the palace treasury officials who were still crying out for injustice and refused to submit to the ground and tying them up. The officials in front of the hall couldn't help but shake their heads. They had wanted to persuade the imperial envoy to at least leave some face for the officials. Thinking of Fan Xian's earlier display of warmth and sternness, they were intimidated by that kind of warmth, coldness and mood swings. They didn't dare to open their mouths and plead for mercy. As a subordinate, they were not afraid of their superior's cruelty. They were afraid of their superior's moods and not knowing when they would pull out that knife again. Fan Xian's last opening of the palace treasury yamen thus ended. After the hall dispersed, he asked Deputy Ma Jie to stay behind. The two of them sat in the garden behind the manor. As they got close to the scent of spring, they talked about some matters that carried the chill of autumn. "Don't blame me for being too ruthless." Fan Xian rubbed the slightly dry corners of his eyes and said, "Since they dared to make a move at the beginning of my tenure, then don't blame me for taking down their black veil." Ma Jie smiled bitterly. Although in name, he and Fan Xian were deputy and it appeared that there was not much of a difference in rank, he knew that in reality, the power in the hands of the young master in front of him was shockingly great. It was even more terrifying than that of the princes. Thus, when Fan Xian had discussed with him last night about getting rid of the eldest princess trusted aides in the palace treasury, although he had expressed a little worry and had exonerated those officials, he had not dared to oppose it to his face. Now, Fan Xian had once again asked him to stay behind alone. Furthermore, he had said such honest words in front of him. Ma Jie knew that Fan Xian was preparing to raise him as a trusted aide. While he was secretly happy, he was also a little worried. After all, no one knew who would win in many years between this young master in front of him and those elders in Jingdo. The court officials were also very sensitive to the ownership of the dragon chair. Although it looked like the crown prince would ascend the throne, the emperor's behavior these 2 years had been too strange, so no one dared to completely believe it. If it was the second prince ascending the throne, everyone knew that Commissioner Fan and the second prince did not have a good relationship. If he was determined to follow Commissioner Fan and the second prince inherited the throne, he would certainly not have a good end. This was what Ma Jie had been secretly worried about. However, he also knew that although one had to suck up to both sides in officialdom, when it came to important matters such as choosing sides, the biggest taboo was to be an opportunist. Today was the last day before Fan Xian left the palace treasury. Talking to him again was, of course, to make his attitude clear. Ma Jie had thought about it all night, so he was not very flustered. Calmly he said, "Everything you have discussed is what I have requested. I will immediately write 2 documents on this matter. One will be sent to the Hall of Governmental Affairs. The other will be sent immediately on horseback to the Suzhou governor's manor. Please, do not worry." Hearing these words, Fan Xian knew that Ma Jie knew to tie his thigh. He was even willing to use these 2 documents to share the criticism that Fan Xian might receive. He also wanted to use this to show the people in officialdom where he stood. He had made up his mind. He glanced warmly at Ma Jie and said, "Sir Ma is considerate." Ma Jie smiled slightly and replied, "As the deputy of the palace treasury, I should be investigating the officials under me. For them to cause trouble this time, it is already my dereliction of duty." Fan Xian smiled. A moment later, he opened his mouth and said, "Does Sir Ma think that my handling of the matter today was appropriate?" Ma Jie thought for a moment and then respectfully replied, "Sir, you have thought far ahead. It is indeed a good plan. Officials are not like treasurers. They cannot be casually killed or casually punished. If the case was tried in the transport company's yamen, it would take too long. It would also easily attract criticism. Tomorrow you will take these criminal officials to Suzhou and hand them over to the governor for interrogation. Governor Shui is a pillar of the country. He has a powerful official reputation and admires you. He will certainly be able to help the court investigate this case and give the emperor a good explanation." Fan Xian gave a silent praise in his heart. This deputy had indeed guessed his thoughts clearly. Fan Xian was going to find a way to get rid of Xinyang's trusted aides in the palace treasury. Although the strike this time had given him a good excuse, if he completely did it himself, it would not be appropriate. The matter involved the eldest princess, princes and other nobles in the palace. Throwing this hot potato to that super-ranked official was a clever move. First, the Jiangnan road governor had jurisdiction over this matter. Second, although Shui Qing would secretly curse him as a border official, his position was different. He was not afraid of the eldest princess far away in Jingdou. On the contrary, he would be wary of Fan Xian deep in the heart of Jiangnan. Weighing the two, Shui Qing should know very well what he should do. Before coming, Shaoan had mentioned to me that this cousin of mine has the talent to save the world. After getting to know each other these days, it seems that Shaoan was indeed not boasting. Fan Xian smiled and changed the topic. He once again began to use Ren Shaoan as a middleman to close the distance between the two of them. Ma Jie smiled and said, 2 years ago when the commissioner entered the capital, you and Shaoan hit it off at first sight. When Shaoan sent letters, he often mentioned your shocking talent and that in the future, you will definitely be an official who can save the world. The deputy and principal chatted happily and gave each other high hats and flattery. They also agreed on the procedures for future trips to the palace treasury. Then they raised their hands and bid farewell. Seeing him to the door of the garden, Fan Xian looked at Ma Jie's slightly bowed body and blinked his eyes. It looked like there were indeed a number of powerful figures in court. However, those people lacked many favors from his previous life, so they didn't have many opportunities to display them. After today's matter was settled, the palace treasury would have no major problems. He also felt relaxed. Furthermore, the work of stuffing trusted aides into the transport company would gradually begin in the middle of the year. With Ma Jie's help, this matter would go smoothly. At this moment, Fan Xian could not guess what it was that made Ma Jie choose him and not the legitimate prince. This was certainly not something that could be swayed by the close relationship between Taichung Temple's vice official, Ren Shaoan. In reality, the reason for Ma Jie's defection was very simple. Because of the relationship between the third prince and Fan Xian, it made him make a large bet concerning his future career as an official and the rise and fall of his family. He bet all of his silver on the little one. After seeing off Deputy Ma and welcoming seventh shopkeeper, Fan Xian appeared particularly busy on the day before he was about to leave the palace treasury. Seventh Yi was the leader of the 4 shopkeepers following Fan Xian to the south. Now he was already a director of Qingyu Hall. These years he had been helping the Fan Manor earn money. He was on good terms with Fan Xixia and was also very familiar with Fan Xian. Thus, there were some things that he didn't even dare to probe the other shopkeepers into, but Fan Xian was able to directly say them in front of him. The old man and the young man gathered together and whispered to each other. It was always about the future management and production of the palace treasury. Fan Xian knew that he was a layman in terms of production management, chemistry, and physics, so he delegated all of the authority in this area to Seventh Yi. He did not have many good qualities, but he did not doubt the people he used. It was like this in the palace treasury, and it had always been like this in Jingdo. As long as it involved an open conspiracy, it was all handled by Sir Yan Jr. of the 4th Bureau. Fan Xian had absolute trust in the other party's professional abilities and would not idiotically point fingers. After confirming all of the matters, Fan Xian relaxed. In the past, the old Yi family had been so prosperous. Now, under the shopkeeper's hands, they would certainly be able to gradually reverse the poor management of the palace treasury and the problems with the quality and quantity of production. As long as they could sell more silver, they would have a preliminary account to the emperor. This was something Fan Xian was more concerned about. The matter of delaying wages can't happen again. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed. You should also pay more attention to the quality of the goods. Seventh Yi glanced at him. He was confused as to why the commissioner was always thinking about the matter of wages. Of course, he also didn't understand the reason. The spring light filled the garden. The old shopkeeper looked at Fan Xian's handsome face and for some reason wandered off. He faintly thought that although the young master and the young lady did not look alike, they were both the most elegant people in the world. Now that the young master had finally regained control of the Yi family business, although he was only managing it, the old shopkeeper still found it difficult to suppress his emotions. He sighed endlessly in his heart, but he hid it well on his face. The reason he had to hide it was because after nearly 20 years of house arrest in Jingdo, these old shopkeepers all knew that there were some things that could only be done and not said. If there was any sign, it would bring unnecessary trouble for the young master. I had wanted to ask you to go to Northern Qi to help the second prince. Fan Xian didn't notice Seventh Yi's thoughts and smiled bitterly. I didn't think that those eunuchs would keep following. The palace is very strict, so I could only have you come to the palace treasury. Seventh Yi smiled slightly and said, For your sake, the eunuchs are already very gentle to us. The second young master was born to be a merchant, so you don't have to worry. As for the palace treasury, you should know that I very much wanted to come back and take a look. Fan Xian fell silent. A moment later he said, Su Wenmao is here. If you feel any discomfort or if anyone dares to raise an eyebrow at you, tell him. I've already told him, since we've left the capital, we can't suffer any more grievances. Seventh Yi's heart was moved, but he didn't say anything. A gust of wind blew past. Before the tender green leaves on the green tree in the courtyard had fully grown, they were blown off. Fan Xian made a light sound and casually scooped them up in his hand. Looking at the new cut, he furrowed his brows for a long time. After a long time he asked quietly and faintly, Can the art be copied down? Seventh Yi's body trembled slightly. A moment later he shook his head. It's a dead rule. It can't be written down. It can only be passed down by word of mouth. Fan Xian said, The blueprints can't be passed down by word of mouth. Seventh Yi shook his head. I watched it closely earlier. I don't even know where it is now. Fan Xian thought for a moment. A slight smile rose to his face. In a few months, come to Hangzhou and tell me about it. My memory is very good. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 356. The wheels of the four-wheeled carriage rolled over the grass that had just sprouted on the official road. When they collided with the cracks of the stones on the road, they made a creaking sound, which matched the sound of the reeds in the carriage as if they were singing cheerfully. The road out of the palace treasury was filled with a joyous scene. Little birds flew quickly in the distant forest beside the paddy fields. The green rice seedlings revealed their slender and shy bodies. The weeds beside the paddy fields looked at them disdainfully. There was an endless stream of carriages on the road, and cargo ships came and went on the river. They transported the products of the palace treasury through various channels and sold them to the people of the world. It was a lively scene. A group of carriages, led by soldiers, easily passed through the innermost inspection line. Originally, the wagons on the official road did not dare to fight with this group of carriages and unconsciously stopped. However, Someone in the group of carriages took a few glances and seemed to have found that there were too many goods coming out of the palace treasury today and the traffic was busy. He ordered his group of carriages to stop on a patch of grass by the side of the road and, surprisingly, let the wagons go first. In the second-to-last carriage of the group of carriages were the pitiful Palace Treasury Transport Company officials who had just had their black gauze removed and official robes taken off yesterday. These officials were all trusted aides the eldest princess had placed in the palace treasury. Although they had thought that their days would not be easy after Commissioner Fan took office, they had not thought that Fan Xian would not give the officials and his mother-in-law any face. He had very straightforwardly captured them. Furthermore, the reason he had used was the labor unrest. These officials now knew that they had fallen into Fan Xian's trap. Their hearts were filled with fear and unease. However, Fan Xian did not immediately open the court to try the case. These officials all had friends and knew last night in the prison that Fan Xian was prepared to bring them to Suzhou and hand them over to the Jiangnan governor, Xueqin, to be personally interrogated. Hearing this news, the officials' moods improved slightly. As long as they didn't face the Overwatch Council's tiger stool and pepper water, how could this case be so easily settled? Even if the Overwatch Council had the confessions of the treasurer's betrayal, as long as they refused to admit it to the death after they arrived in Suzhou, Xueqin Sir Xue would have to give the eldest princess some face. As long as they dragged it out for a few more hours, once the pressure from Jingdo had arrived, Fan Xian would be too busy to take care of himself. Presumably he would not pay any more attention to them. Why did Xueqin have to be interrogated? Haitang leaned against the window and furrowed her brows slightly. Fan Xian lowered his head and said, "I'm not suited to do this." Haitang made a soft sound of agreement and said nothing more. Ever since the day of the strike, the atmosphere between the two of them had become somewhat strange. The mutual trust they had in the past seemed to have weakened a little. They treated each other politely, but there was also a hint of unfamiliarity. After thinking about it, Haitang understood why. She knew that her proposal to travel had indeed put Fan Xian in a difficult position. But seeing that Fan Xian was always so deliberately indifferent, she couldn't take the initiative to explain. After all, no matter what, Haitang was the saint girl of Northern Qi. Her status was extraordinary, and Fan Xian's pride touched her pride. Thus, the two of them maintained this awkward exchange. "I want to confirm again. Have the silver arrived yet?" Fan Xian frowned. A faint smile rose to Haitang's face. It was as if she was mocking Fan Xian's worry about personal gains and losses. Quietly she said, "I said it last time in Suzhou, why are you so worried? Perhaps you don't trust me now?" Fan Xian suddenly felt the atmosphere in the carriage was somewhat oppressive. In a low voice, he said a few words to Cece beside him and then lifted the curtain to disembark. Cece tilted her head slightly and looked curiously at Haitang. She didn't know how this famous girl had offended the young master. She had seen clearly these few days that although the young master and Haitang did not have any romantic feelings, at first their behavior was very much like that of a close friend of many years. These few days he had been a bit strange. Haitang was puzzled by Cece's gaze. She suddenly smiled and said, "What are you looking at?" Cece said without good humor, "You're only allowed to look at me, not me looking at you?" Haitang smiled and shook her head. Out of habit, she moved her hands to her waist and found that they were empty. These few days she had been wearing the clothes of a serving girl and not the patterned jacket she was used to wearing. There were no too large pockets in front of her. She gazed at Cece and teased, "I'm looking at you because I want to see what the girl Fan Xian likes looks like." These words were the truth. Haitang had always been confused. Her good friend Si Lily was clearly the most beautiful girl in the world. Why was Fan Xian able to maintain his calm in front of Si Lily and purposely maintain his distance? Even after that wild night, he did not have any longing for Si Lily. They had been in Jiangnan for dozens of days, yet Fan Xian had not asked her a single question, such as how Si Lily was doing recently. No matter how heartless a person was, he would not be so cold toward a beautiful girl he had shared a night with and the blessing of being in the same carriage. Thus, Haitang even began to suspect that Fan Xian had some hidden illness like the emperor. However, Fan Xian had taken Cece into his room. On this trip, Haitang knew that Cece, the serving girl, was someone in Fan Xian's room, so she felt it was strange. After looking at her these days, she still could not see what was so special about Cece. Her appearance was only dignified and delicate, far from Si Lily's soft charm and fullness. Hearing Haitang say the girl Fan Xian likes, Cece's face suddenly reddened. Using a voice as small as a mosquito, she replied, "How could the young master like me?" Haitang smiled bitterly and shook her head. "If he didn't like you, why would he take you into his room?" Although Fan Xian is a cold-blooded and heartless person, I don't believe he would do something like this. Cece suddenly raised her face and revealed a proud and confident expression. You are mistaken. The young master is the person who values relationships the most in the world. Relationships? Hai Tang savored these two words and remembered that Cece seemed to have served Fan Xian since he was a child. For a moment, she furrowed her brows and hesitated in her heart. Fan Xian was such a cold-blooded and heartless young official who took pleasure in scheming against others. Was he really a person who valued relationships? She sighed. Because there were no large pockets on her clothes, she could only regretfully roll up her two sleeves and ask, Miss Cece, why were you staring at me earlier? In reality, Cece had some conflicting feelings towards Hai Tang, who had been inseparable from the young master for the past few days. After all, she was not the young mistress and was an enemy of Northern Qi. But later, after interacting with her more like many people who had interacted with Hai Tang, Cece also easily liked this girl who was gentle in speech, bright in conduct and straightforward in temperament. Hai Tang was a person of noble status. Although her face appeared indifferent and she did not speak much, she treated people with sincerity. No matter what status someone had, she would treat them equally. Furthermore, it was a respect and equality that came from her bones, such as Cece, who was still a servant girl. Just this point alone made her surpass the rest of the world. Hearing Hai Tang's question, Cece couldn't help but cover her mouth and smile. Just as you think, I also want to see what the young master looks like. The carriage quieted down. Hai Tang opened her large, bright eyes and looked at Cece like she was looking at a cute little animal. A moment later, she put her hands in her sleeves and shrugged. Do the Hu people not kill people? The Western Hu and the Northern barbarians had slaughtered countless Chinese people over the centuries. Their evil reputation had spread far and wide. Cece replied firmly, Impossible. Hai Tang blinked slowly and smiled. It's the same principle. A light breeze brushed past Fan Xian's face, telling him that it was spring. He closed his eyes and welcomed the breeze in his face. Smelling the scent of life in the wind, he was very pleased. The green leaves of the forest on the other side of the paddy field in front of him rustled in the wind. Suddenly his eyelids moved slightly. He heard a rustling sound coming from behind him. It was not the wind rustling through the trees, not sweeping the street, not throwing dice, not writing with the tip of a pencil, and not eating the mulberry leaves in spring. It was her walking. The village girl was walking. Fan Xian didn't open his eyes. Slowly he said, Why is it impossible? Hai Tang calmly walked to his side and used one word to express her question. Her lightness was very much like the blind man's question to Qin Pingping many years ago. The corner of Fan Xian's mouth twitched. Why do you think it's impossible for me to like you? According to the council, the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi is already anxious about your marriage. Hai Tang put her hands in her sleeves and stood by his side. Looking at the cattle in the paddy field in front of them, she smiled slightly. She knew that her conversation with Cece in the carriage had been completely heard by him. She opened her mouth and said, Looks like your Jinchi has recovered well. Fan Xian opened his eyes and stared at a little bird that had landed on the back of a cattle. With a smile, he asked, What I'm asking is, why it's impossible for me to like you. Hai Tang turned her head to glance at him and found that he was asking this question very seriously. She couldn't help but reply helplessly, I always like to be so flowery, but I can't really take advantage of you. Fan Xian was silent. He thought of the conversation he had with Seventh Yi yesterday. After his rebirth, there were many things he could only do and not say. However, with Hai Tang, it seemed that he could only say it and not do it. He couldn't help smiling and said, I'm just curious as to why you're so sure. Hai Tang smiled slightly and said, In Shangjing you once said that all men or perhaps male animals think with the lower half of their bodies. I don't think I have that kind of appearance to attract your attention. After all, my identity is different. You have restraints and you can't gain any benefits. How could you like me? Hai Tang was the sage girl of Northern Qi, and Fan Xian was a powerful official of the Qing kingdom. The two of them could interact as friends. If they were to become a couple, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager and the Qing Emperor would certainly not allow such a thing to happen. On the contrary, it would bring harm to their plans. However, Fan Xian was not thinking of this. He mockingly said, Liking such a thing has nothing to do with benefits. I've found that in just half a year, your temperament has changed a great deal from before. When they were in Hangzhou, Fan Xian seemed to have said these words to Hai Tang. Hai Tang was silent for a moment and then slowly said, Tianyi Dao pays attention to the connection between heaven and man, the world above and the people below. I had originally thought that these things could be done naturally. However, in this half a year, I've been entangled in many plans. It is very different from the way of our sect, so it is inevitable that I am not used to it. Fan Xian nodded slightly and said in agreement, "This kind of scheming is indeed only suitable for people like me. You should go back to being a village girl, a job with a future." He thought of something inside. "Speaking of which, your temperament is not harmonious. In the end, it is my problem. If I hadn't pulled you into the situation when we were in Shangjing, perhaps you would still be raising chickens and playing with donkeys in the garden." He turned to Hai Tang and smiled slightly. "Does this count as me leading you into the demonic path?" "What is the demonic path?" Hai Tang replied calmly. "It is only a demon in one's heart. With desires comes loss. Although my desires appear grand, they still have losses. This is the so-called way of nature." Fan Xian asked, "Then you still persist?" "Of course," Hai Tang said quietly. "And Ji, you once said something that resonates deeply with my heart." "What did you say?" "In this world, there has never been a good war or a bad peace." Hai Tang smiled slightly. "For this goal, I am willing to help you." Fan Xian once again sank into silence. He looked at the scene in front of him in a daze. He saw that the bird, perhaps on the mud-covered body of the ox, did not find any parasites to fill its stomach, so it flew away with a whoosh. "Actually, you don't have to feel too inferior." Fan Xian turned his head to look at Hai Tang. Very seriously, he said, "I've always felt that you look very dignified." Hai Tang was speechless. A moment later she replied, "Dare I ask, is this praise or mockery?" Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "It is only in response to what you said earlier, the reason why I could not possibly like you. I am expressing my feelings." Hai Tang finally couldn't resist rolling her eyes at him like a little girl. It was very rare. Fan Xian felt an itch between his brows. He stretched out his finger and rubbed it. "Don't compare yourself to me. Compared to me, there aren't many women in this world who are beautiful." He gloomily said, "This is not my problem. This is my parents' problem." No matter how calm and composed Hai Tang was, she was still a teenage girl. Which girl didn't care about appearance? Unless she was blind. She was angered by Fan Xian's words, which were clearly comforting but secretly mocking. She thought to herself that his mouth was indeed a bit annoying. She gritted her teeth and said, "As a high-ranking official, it's best if you don't make things up." Fan Xian didn't seem to notice her anger and explained seriously, "I'm not making things up. You said I could not possibly like you because you are not beautiful enough. I want to explain to you that, in my opinion, your appearance is not bad." Hai Tang was slightly startled. Fan Xian's next words came very quickly. "After all, there are precedents. The people of Jingdo all say that my wife is only delicate and pretty. In my opinion, is the most beautiful woman in the world." He shook his head and sighed. "My sense of beauty is probably not the same as most people in this world." These words finally poisoned Hai Tang. She gave a muffled grunt, took out her hands from her sleeves and swept them away. With a sweep of her sleeves, the grass on the grass flew wildly. The wind moved without reason. It was forceful. Presumably, this sweep contained the supreme Jinqi of Tianyi Dao. Fan Xian raised his hand to cover his eyes. He was very wretched in the grass. He swayed back and forth as if he could fall to the ground at any moment. Yet, his incomparably joyful laughter rang out from the grass that filled the air. The wind stopped and the grass fell. Hai Tang stood quietly to the side with a glimmer of mockery on her face. Looking at him, she said mockingly, "After humiliating me, have you vented the anger from 2 days ago?" Fan Xian sighed and smiled slightly. "Duo, are you still breathing?" This was the first time he had referred to her as Duo after the strike. After a moment of surprise, Hai Tang slowly turned and walked toward the carriage. The swordsman of the 6th Bureau in the carriage had long gotten off to stand guard. The Tiger Guards with Gao Da in the lead watched Hai Tang cautiously. After all, Fan Xian's subordinates didn't know what had happened during the earlier gust of grass. They were afraid that Hai Tang would suddenly attack. Fan Xian followed and smiled slightly. "Don't be in a hurry to get on the carriage. Walk with me." He waved his hand to have Gao Da and the others retreat. After giving them a few more orders, he took Hai Tang and walked side by side along the woodland beside the road. The two of them walked side by side. There was already a long distance between them and the group of carriages. Sunlight shone through the spring forest above their heads. Strands of light intersected and transformed into all kinds of beautiful spots of light, shining on their clothes. "I am a person who cares a lot about trust," Fan Xian said calmly. Perhaps it is because it is very difficult for me to find someone worthy of trust in this life, so I was a bit disappointed that you wanted to leave the manor that day. Haiteng lowered her head slightly and didn't explain anything. Instead, she said straightforwardly, Duo is also a person who cares a lot about this matter. After all, you and I belong to two different countries. If there is no trust, it would be very difficult to accomplish anything. Once the words were out, it was relatively simple. However, asking Haiteng if she wanted to go to the workshop to peep or if Fan Xian had misunderstood this girl was already a very unnecessary matter. Since the trust between the two of them had been restored to a certain extent through Fan Xian's sharp tongue, bringing up old matters again would seem very stupid. The two of them walked forward side by side. Haiteng glanced at him out of the corner of her eye and furrowed her brows. Her hands were still in her sleeves. It was not as comfortable as Fan Xian putting them in his large pockets. Fan Xian quietly explained, I had Cici add 2 pockets to the Overwatch Council uniform. Haiteng smiled slightly and sighed with some regret. In the woodland beside the official road, a rustling sound rose again. This pair of man and woman who did not have a personal relationship but were particularly demanding of each other's trust, were just like half a year ago in the royal palace in Shangjing in northern Qi. They naturally dragged their heels and walked lazily on the road beside the Yuchuan River. In front and behind them was a scene of spring. The leaves above their heads were tender and lovely. How do you plan on dealing with the Ming family? Haiteng asked quietly. Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched slightly and said, there are a total of 16 projects in the palace treasury's opening bid. In the past, the Chui and Ming families took up 14 projects. Now that the Chui family has fallen, there are about 6 spots left. I have already arranged for people to take them over. After Xia has pretty much gathered up the remnants of the Chui family's business in the north and the south will come together and the roads will open up again. As long as your commander of the guard doesn't mess around, there will be no problems with the goods the palace treasury sends to the north. As for how much of my own goods I can get, that will depend on how much control I have over the palace treasury. This was the agreement between him and the northern Qi emperor. Haiteng had come south to keep an eye on this matter and that large sum of silver. Haiteng was silent for a moment and then said, even if you can completely control the palace treasury in a short amount of time, if the amount you send to the north, according to the agreement, it will be more than what the eldest princess has sent in the past. How can you guarantee the amount you send to the Qing court? I'm worried that you won't be able to explain it to the Qing emperor. Before I came this time, the emperor asked me to bring you a message. Since it is impossible to satisfy the needs of the north this year, we can postpone it for 2 years until you have a stable footing. After all, this is a long-term plan. He hadn't thought that the northern Qi emperor would be so considerate of him. He couldn't resist smiling and saying, we'll see how it goes. As long as the palace treasury's output this year is significantly higher than in previous years, it will be easy for me to explain it to the court. Haiteng glanced at him and asked with confusion, where will this increase come from? Fan Xian calmly replied, first of course the output of the various workshops in the palace treasury has to increase. After the new source is created, there will be the old shopkeeper, Su Wen Mao, and the old Ministry of Revenue officials my father sent to tamper with the accounts. You also know that the one overseeing the palace treasury is me. It won't be too difficult for me to wipe away the traces. Second, I plan to take a big bite out of the Ming family and dig out this large family's wealth to offer with both hands to the emperor. The emperor will certainly be very happy. He returned to the question Haiteng had asked at the very beginning. How exactly did he plan to deal with the Ming family? Hearing his tone, Haiteng didn't seem to be prepared to wipe out the Ming family in a short amount of time. She was a little surprised and asked, you can tolerate the Ming family? I have no choice, at least for this year, Fan Xian said with a self-mocking smile. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, the Chui family's foundation is too shallow. Their battle lines are spread too far so the Overwatch Council can succeed in one battle. However, the Ming family is a century-old family. Long before the palace treasury they were a famous Jiangnan family. Their foundation is very solid. A large family of tens of thousands of people, who knows how many of them are officials in court. If we use thunderous methods to deal with them, I'm afraid Jiangnan Road will fall into chaos. The most important thing is, the eldest princess, crown prince and second prince all have shares in it. Perhaps you won't believe it, but even the Fan family has a position in it. Furthermore, they send heavy gifts to Jingdo every year. The various ministries and even the Bureau of Military Affairs have a very good impression of the Ming family. They have always kept a low profile. You have also seen young Master Ming. He is a very steady person in the way he does things, and he does not have a bad reputation among the people. If we want to touch them, it will be very difficult. Haiteng also began to feel that this matter was complicated. She found that although there was worry between Fan Xian's brows, he still did not lose his confidence. She asked, "What is your trump card?" "My trump card is the Emperor," Fan Xian said seriously. "The Ming family stole silver from the palace treasury and gave a portion to the princess, princes and officials. Everyone in the world likes the Ming family, but the Emperor doesn't like it. But the Emperor does not like it because the Ming family stole his silver." Not counting the words below. "First of all, I sincerely request for monthly tickets because Old Six's position is very dangerous. 3,000 RMB. At this time I have to take the night train to Guangzhou and arrive tomorrow. It's just that the journey will be long and I have to pack up and make arrangements, so the updates for the next few days will be a little less messy. Please understand. Why do I have to go out? It's not that I have anything to do, it's just that I'm getting moldy from sitting at home. I need a change of environment and adjust my state of mind. Perhaps everyone doesn't understand the feeling of sitting alone at home from body to brain. Ever since I started writing the Qingyu year, my life has become rigid. Every day I stay at home, sit and occasionally go out, but I don't dare to drink. A life without the word presumptuous is very depressing." Lying on the bed, Wu Zhu and Fan Xian were still fighting in their heads. At 30 years of life, they finally understood the feeling of insomnia. Of course, I think this is a necessary professional attitude and occupational disease for writers. Other than a professional attitude, I need to adjust, so I decided to stay in Canton for a few days. It won't be too long and it won't affect my writing. I just need to go out for a walk. The friend who wrote The Evil Ming is also in the same predicament, but he doesn't have time to drink with me. I also don't dare go to his place, so I can only go south. I hope everyone's body and spirit are not sub-healthy and smile more in life. In the end, I still firmly extended my hand to ask for a monthly ticket. Chapter 357. After hearing Fan Xian's analysis, Haiteng felt slightly reassured. She thought that as long as he grasped this point, with the secret connivance of the Qing Emperor, as long as he made detailed plans and careful arrangements, then the fall of the Ming family was only a matter of time. No matter how powerful a local noble family was, in the face of the powerful machinery of the country, it was still a weak egg next to a rock. "This year's goal is to eat up the Ming family's silver," Fan Xian said. "The palace treasury bidding needs to be pressured by the Ming family. Furthermore, after winning the bid, it needs to reserve 40% of the base price. This spring opening, I will have people compete with the Ming family and raise the price so that the Ming family will have to pay a lot of blood. They will no longer have the ability to compete with me for the position the Chui family has vacated. At the same time, I will raise some quick silver and quickly fill it into the national treasury." "How high are you going to raise it?" Haiteng asked seriously. Fan Xian smiled and said, "As high as I can go. You know I am a very greedy person." Haiteng furrowed her brows and said, "Since you don't plan on directly clashing with the Ming family, then you can only use the matter of opening the bidding to attack them. However, raising the price is not like shouting numbers into a dice box in a gambling den. If you raise the price too high and directly take it from the Ming family's hands. 16 items in the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury, 40% of the silver. Calculate how much silver you will need. How will you get it?" "It is clear bidding," Fan Xian explained. "In order to prevent officials and merchants from secretly colluding, the palace treasury has always used clear bidding for the spring opening. Coincidentally, this has given me an opportunity. Since everything is done in the open, naturally I will." He thought for a bit and did not continue to hide anything. In a quiet voice he said, "I will have Xia Qifei name a suitable price and then let the Ming family know." "Xia Qifei?" Haiteng was slightly surprised. The head of the Jiangnan water bandits, a famous figure on the Jianghu. How could he listen to your arrangements to fight against the Ming family? You have to know that he was born and raised in Jiangnan. As for Xia Qifei's past, Fan Xian would not continue to explain. He only indicated that Xia Qifei was already one of his people. He then explained the problem of silver. "Just as you said, the silver we have on hand is not enough to completely swallow up all 16 items of the palace treasury. Naturally, a portion of it has to be left for the Ming family. For one, it is to appease the other party. For another, it is to use that enormous sum of silver to trap the Ming family in Jiangnan and make it impossible for them to escape." Haiteng asked curiously, "How can you be sure the Ming family won't cut their losses?" These past few years they have already earned too much money. This time, anyone with a discerning eye knows that you have come to Jiangnan to deal with them. If you let Xia Qifei shout out a jaw-dropping high price, what if that old Ming master claps his hands and decides to stop playing? Wouldn't you suffer a loss in silence? Without a deposit, the Qing court will certainly not let Xia Qifei off easy. Fan Xian smiled coldly. Even if the Ming family vomits blood this year, they must still win the palace treasury bid. So what if their family has tens of thousands of acres of fertile land? In the end, they are just inanimate objects. How can they compare to the living water, fish and grass of the palace treasury? Furthermore, this matter involves the interests of the members of the royal family in Jingdo. If the Ming family wants to send out silver and protect the eldest princess' face and interests, they must continue to stay in the palace treasury. He gazed at the slowly rising black smoke in the forest and narrowed his eyes. Merchants in the end are just puppets. The Ming family produces pirates to rob the treasures of the palace treasury and then turn around to take money from the court. They are vicious and merciless. Once they stop, those people in Jingdo will have no income. How could they let them go in their anger and humiliation? At that time, I won't even have to make a move. They will collapse. Thus, no matter what, the Ming family must control a large portion of the palace treasury goods this year. First, they will stabilize for a year or two. Then, they will see how the bloodless but particularly sinister struggle in Jingdo will develop. That sum of silver, are you going to transfer it to Xia Qifei? This was a question that Haitang was very concerned about. Fan Xian nodded. A portion. Although father has prepared some for me, once the palace treasury opens, everyone is watching me and the treasury of the Ministry of Revenue. The eldest princess has probably long guessed this source of income of mine. If I truly use the Ministry of Revenue's stored silver to fight this battle with the Ming family, I'm afraid if I'm not careful, I will lose everything. He self-mockingly said, using the silver of the national treasury is a crime that can get my entire family beheaded. I'm cowardly. Haitang heard him admit he was cowardly and shook her head non-committally. In a quiet voice she asked, but using Taiping Money House to transfer silver over? The background of Taiping Money House is dongy. Aren't you afraid they will notice something? Fan Xian glanced at her and slowly said, this is the arrangement of your emperor. Perhaps even you would not have thought of it. A month after the Nyolan Street incident 2 years ago, the silver of the Northern Qi Palace treasury began to flow slowly and unobtrusively into the Taiping Money House through dozens of channels. No one knows how many twists and turns there were before the silver was moved to Jiangnan. Haitang was startled and speechless. Fan Xian continued, I had the help of the Overwatch Council and the Ministry of Revenue, but I still did not detect the direction of these dozens of sums of silver. Furthermore, although that sum of silver was large, it was not particularly eye-catching in Taiping Money House, the #1 bank in the world. I think Dongy certainly did not notice it. Haitang shook her head in disbelief and said, wait, you're saying, this sum of silver was moved 2 years ago by the emperor to Jiangnan? How is that possible? I only learned of this in September last year, and there has been no news of it in Shangjing. Correct. A glimmer of admiration and wariness flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. I only went to investigate again after you told me everything. In the end I didn't find anything. I only faintly found that the time when those dozens of sums of silver entered Taiping Money House was 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Haitang furrowed her brows. You had only just entered Jingdo. How could the emperor guess that you would be in charge of the palace treasury in 2 years? How could he know that he would join hands with you and gobble up the palace treasury's marketing rights? Fan Xian said self-mockingly, at that time, I was just a nameless illegitimate child in Count Sinan's manor. He sighed faintly and said, perhaps it was the Nyolan Street incident that made your little emperor confirm that the eldest princess wanted to kill me. Furthermore, from various intelligence reports, he determined that I would be in charge of the Qing National Treasury. As for what happened afterward, perhaps it was just his analysis. Since there was no way for the eldest princess and I to work together, then I had to cut off the eldest princess's arm. The Chui family? The Ming family? No wonder at the end of last year, our two sides were able to deal with the Chui family so smoothly. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, but your emperor, how could he have guessed that I would use this move against the Ming family? If you want to say that he calculated to this point, I can only give him one sentence. Haitang had still not shaken off her shock. She had truly not thought that the young emperor with whom she had grown up and who often called her aunt disciple, would have such deep and far-sighted plans. As far back as 2 years ago, He had already begun to make arrangements to deal with Fan Xian or other possible variables. Hearing Fan Xian's words, she unconsciously asked, "What sentence?" "It seems that your lord's wisdom is truly close to that of a demon," Fan Xian said gently. Fan Xian said in a gentle voice, "He began planning 2 years ago. The development of the world has not deviated much from his guesses. Even if the emperor had decided to clean up the palace treasury and had not used me, the me that you Northern Qi can fully trust, I'm afraid he still had a way to change the face of this silver and participate in the opening of the palace treasury bidding this time." It was not until now that Fan Xian somewhat gloomily admitted that he had indeed underestimated the young ruler in the north. Regarding the palace treasury, the most dazzling golden pheasant in the world, because the Qing kingdom guarded it very closely, no other country could do anything about it. They had tried to steal its craftsmanship for a dozen years without success. Who would have thought that the Northern Qi emperor would be so unconventional and play such a trick? For the Northern Qi emperor, since he couldn't steal your family's treasures as a thief and couldn't beat your family's guards as a bandit, then he would shake his body and become a nameless capital merchant. He would mingle in the process of your family's treasures. Although he wouldn't be able to get the first bite, he wouldn't just eat scraps. However, in this arrangement of the world, Fan Xian, a variable that surprised the Northern Qi people, later appeared, so the Northern Qi emperor became more and more generous and steady. Fan Xian sighed. In this world there were many extremely intelligent and astute people. In comparison, he, an internationalist, carried too much of an idealist. "Are you angry?" Haitang looked at his expression and asked probingly. Fan Xian smiled slightly and shook his head. "If your emperor had been hiding this matter from me, of course I would be angry. But now he must cooperate with me, so what is there for me to be angry about? Right now, it is as if he has used all of this money as a hostage and handed it into my hands. This is enough to exchange for my trust in him." Haitang sighed and said, "You are not a person who trusts others easily." Fan Xian lowered his head and slowly said, "Trust is mutual. I am just curious as to why your emperor trusts me so much. You have to know that in the future, if the two countries become hostile or if I have other thoughts, then I can eat his silver at any time and cut off his goods. He has no chance of turning the tables." He raised his head and looked into Haitang's eyes that were as bright as a clear lake. In a quiet voice he said, "I have some misgivings about this sudden trust." Haitang was silent and thought for a moment. Suddenly she smiled and said, "When I mentioned this sum of silver to you in the letter, it seems that is when the rumors of your past will appear in the world." Fan Xian looked at her with confusion. "What is the connection?" Haitang smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps in the emperor's view, since you are a descendant of the Yi family, then you will not be satisfied with being a powerful official of the Qing kingdom. Furthermore, your vision will not be limited to the borders of the country. Everything that the Qing kingdom can give you, the Qi kingdom can give you. The emperor probably has other intentions." She didn't finish her words, but Fan Xian already understood. He shook his head self-mockingly and said, "Thank you for your emperor's good intentions, but I don't want to frown and face thousands of fingers." Haitang smiled and said, "It's rare for me to be in the mood to write poetry." "I will not bow my head and be a willing ox," Fan Xian said lightly. Fan Xian lightly said, "Besides, your emperor should have known later that I was also a genuine Qing prince. There are many princes in this world, but of the descendants of the Yi family, there is only you," Haitang said lightly and gently, but she clearly understood Northern Qi's meaning. Fan Xian smiled and did not continue this topic. He was at the height of his glory in the Qing kingdom. Although there were a few women in the palace and 2 princes in Jingdo, which he had some difficulty dealing with, the emperor was playing the role of a loving father. He could not find a convincing reason to consider Northern Qi's invitation. "Let's go back to the beginning," Fan Xian said. "Why can't you like me? Why can't I like you?" Haitang was dumbfounded and angry. She wondered why this person was always entangled in this matter. In a cold voice she said, Duo has never cared about the matters between men and women. In the realm of love there is no difference between big and small, but there is a difference between up and down. I do not seek to destroy my feelings, but I will not consider this problem." Fan Xian understood that the girl was expressing the meaning of putting the people of the world first. With slight mockery he said, "Worrying about the worries of the world first? Isn't it too boring to live like this? Your emperor still has a hat to play with." He didn't say what color the hat was. Suddenly he smiled brightly and said, Duo. Haitang stopped her steps and tilted her head to look at him. She was dazzled by the gentle smile on Fan Xian's delicate face. she couldn't resist sighing and asked, "What is it?" "It is also possible that the Hu people don't kill," Fan Xian said seriously. Haitang knew he was talking about the words she had used to shut Cece's mouth in the carriage earlier. She couldn't help feeling bitter, but she still replied quietly, "Is that so? Perhaps neither the people of Northern Qi nor the Qing kingdom will believe it." Fan Xian said gently, "Of course, it is possible that the Hu people don't kill people if they have all been turned into dead people by us." Haitang was startled and laughed in spite of herself without rhyme or reason. Fan Xian said quietly, "Using the same logic, it is also possible that I like you, and it is also possible that you like me." Haitang mockingly said, "Wait until we are all dead?" "No," Fan Xian explained seriously. "Wait until everyone else in this world is dead." Haitang had no choice and said, "Everyone is dead, leaving just the two of us standing by the river enjoying the wind." Fan Xian raised his head and thought for a while before nodding. "It does seem to be meaningless." Then he took out both hands from his pockets and held Haitang's hands. Under the girl's slightly startled gaze, he gently rubbed them. He smiled warmly and said, "Since it is meaningless, then don't think about it. The weather is still cold and you're wearing a servant girl's clothes. I'm afraid your hands will freeze." Their four hands clasped together. Firmness and gentleness melded in a patch of warmth. The rumbling of the carriage wheels came from behind the two of them. There was a glimmer of amusement in Haitang's eyes. She didn't pull her hands out. On the contrary, she tilted her head slightly and looked at Fan Xian. "Are you purposely letting others see?" Fan Xian half lowered his head and blinked his eyelashes slightly. In a quiet voice, he replied, "In order to convince my emperor that I brought you to Jiangnan for a reason, in order for the mutual trust between your emperor and me to have a firmer foundation, we must both be closer." Haitang looked at him with a not quite there smile. In the end, Fan Xian said seriously, "Of course your hands are still very comfortable to hold. You often do farm work, but there are no calluses. Student Kitty has already arrived in Guangzhou, but everyone, don't worry. The updates will not stop these 2 days. Carrot at the same time, he also wants me to express sincere and strong thanks to everyone on his behalf. His monthly votes have soared overnight. He can be at ease, haha." By Jessiphy. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support genuine reading. Chapter 358. The interior of Suzhou was a scene of prosperity. Tender green colors could be seen everywhere. It was not much different from the rest of the Qing kingdom. However, the large number of shops, the busy docks, the endless stream of people, the large stretch of government offices in the south of the city, the oppressively wealthy salt merchant manors in the west of the city, the young masters on the streets of the east of the city, and the fierce, sinister and cunning gangster brothers in the north of the city. All of this formed a scene that was different from any other place in the world. It was adventure, excitement, wealth, and desire. Here there was much less of the concealment of scholarly knowledge. The pressure of the thousand-year dynasty was much less. Although no one dared to challenge the authority of the government, because there were too many people moving about, the amount of goods coming in and out of the port was enormous. The citizens had money in their pockets and were able to do things with much more confidence. Putting aside the merchants who had deep connections with the government, just the brothers on the streets who made their living in the waterway also began to learn from the students of the Imperial Academy in Jingdo. They wore long green robes and no longer blindly fought and killed. The large stretch of land downstream of the Suzhou docks was all the Ming family's property. At this moment, the men in long robes were listening obediently to the lecture of a young master. It was clear at a glance that these long-robed men were skilled martial artists. However, in front of this gentle-looking young master, they did not show a glimmer of arrogance. This young master was the son of the old Ming master, Ming Lanshi. These people hanging around on the docks all relied on the Ming family to make a living. They could be considered half-servants. After young Master Ming left, these men pulled at their long robes and wiped the sweat from their foreheads. They whispered among themselves, wondering why young Master Ming would specifically come to remind them to be more well-behaved in Suzhou. Given the power of the Ming family, did they need to be afraid of anyone pulling on their pigtails? The governor did have this ability, but had the old Ming master not fed him enough these few years? The long robes were convenient for wiping sweat. After all, these gangster brothers were not true Jingdo students. However, there were some clever people among them who faintly guessed that it had something to do with the palace treasury opening for the new year. Didn't you hear? The dignified Cui family, one of the two noble families along with the Ming family, had been scooped up by the court during the new year. Rumor had it that this matter was single-handedly handled by the young commissioner of the Overwatch Council. The commissioner was the imperial envoy currently in Jiangnan. Ming Lansher smiled bitterly and shook his head. This is what I said earlier. Sir Fan is different from other officials. Normal methods will not work. If it was any other high-ranking official coming to Jiangnan, the Ming family has plenty of ways to deal with them. Yet it has fallen on Sir Fan Jr. Our usual methods are completely useless. Zhou Lei probingly said, there are no officials in this world who are not greedy. Ming Lansher's eyes narrowed. It was as if he had thought of something that chilled his heart. After a moment of silence, he faintly said, this is the most common method, but it is usually the most effective method. Father saw things very accurately and knew that he had to use the mountain-splitting golden axe. We have also tried it before. He shook his head and sighed. In the end, the other party did not accept it at all and directly retreated. He also didn't say any harsh words. He was just like a block of ice. How much did he give? Zhou Lei did not believe that there were any officials in this world who were not greedy. Even if you were the emperor's illegitimate child, you still had to have silver. Ming Lansher raised 4 fingers. Zhou Lei asked with confusion, just 40,000 liang? A murderous intent appeared between Ming Lansher's brows. He lowered his voice and cursed, 40,000 liang? Didn't you see the 130,000 liang of silver in the chest in the young master's yamen? This time, father moved enough chips and even pushed down the tribute to the capital. He gathered a total of 400,000 liang. 400,000 liang. Zhou Lei's heart trembled. Even his lips began to tremble. Such a large sum of money could buy a small vassal kingdom. Could it not buy the imperial envoy's heart? Ming Lansher gritted his teeth and said, there's also 20% of the shares. Zhou Lei almost couldn't believe his ears. This 20% of the shares was even more terrifying than 400,000 liang. How could the clan bear to use such a large sum of interest to buy Fan Xian? Usually when he served the eldest princess, he had never been so generous. This could no longer even be called generous. It was completely cutting off his own flesh to keep him safe. Ming Lansher slowly closed his eyes. His eyelids moved slightly and his face twisted slightly. Presumably he was very unhappy in his heart. Zhou Lei didn't dare say anything more. The carriage sank into a period of silence. After a long time, Ming Lansher, who was now gradually managing most of the Ming family's businesses for his father, opened his eyes and slowly said, we have all underestimated Sir Fan's appetite. Don't forget, his father is the Minister of Revenue and Court. 400,000 liang can definitely buy a prince, but it cannot buy him. Thus, as I said earlier, this method will not work. What about the eldest princess? Zhou Lei asked with slight hatred. The Ming family has done so much for her. She can't just watch and not do anything, can she? Ming Lansher thought for a while and quietly said, when dealing with officials, if you can't buy them, you will be slandering them. From the center to the limbs, you will have to work hard in Jingdo. In the court, you will have to scheme against the various officials. Unfortunately, this method doesn't seem to be effective. What? Zhou Lei was shocked. Ming Lansher said self-mockingly, what kind of person is Sir Fan? He has Director Qin and Minister Fan behind him. Although Prime Minister Lin has retired a long time ago, his power still remains. As long as the Emperor does not show any inclination, which official would dare to follow our wishes and submit a memorial against him? The Imperial Censorate has done it twice, but unfortunately, they were beaten cold-hearted by the Emperor's cane. Zhou Lei thought for a bit and then shook his head. Today is different from the past. Sir Fan is far away in Jiangnan and has no time to defend himself. He is also far away from the Overwatch Council, so his reaction will certainly not be as fast as it was in the past. Even if his relationship with the Emperor is not normal, even if he is a proper prince, it is impossible for him to cause trouble in Jiangnan and not be summoned back to Jingdo. If we cause trouble, perhaps the Emperor will summon Sir Fan back. Ming Lansher mockingly said, this is the weakness of you officials when you look at problems. You always keep your eyes on official rank and identity. Correct, even if a proper prince comes to Jiangnan, the Ming family has a way to send him back with his tail between his legs. Fan Xian is only the Emperor's illegitimate child, so it seems that we should not be afraid. However, the way the clan looks at problems is different from the way the officials look at problems. In our eyes, Sir Fan has power, soldiers, money, and a good reputation. Yet he is also ruthless. Even if he has some stains, they have been completely wiped clean by the court's Overwatch Council, which is responsible for magnifying the stains. No one can catch him. Who can swallow such a smooth pebble? He is much more difficult to deal with than any royal highness. If we really incite the Jiangnan people to make trouble as you wish. Ming Lansher smiled coldly. Do you believe that Fan Xian would dare to move the Black Knights into Suzhou and directly wipe out the Ming family? Zhou Lei sucked in a cold breath and said hesitantly, no way? Does he really not care about the face of the court at all? The Qing laws are not written for fun. He is a madman. Ming Lansher gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. A seemingly cultured and refined madman. If you can avoid provoking him, then provoke him. Unless you have the confidence to make him disappear from this world. Zhou Lei suddenly quieted down. A moment later he faintly said, the martial assembly? This was the Ming family's secret control of the Jiangnan martial arts world. They only wore the cloak of the court, so the Ming family did not control too many Jianghu aces. However, they had, after all, used Zhou Lei to control a group of fugitives. At this moment he found that the Ming family could not do anything to the pebble-like imperial envoy. A vicious thought flashed through his heart and he brought up this matter. Ming Lansher looked pitifully at Zhou Lei like he was looking at an idiot. Do you not know that Sir Fan himself is a 9th-level ace? Do you not know that the Emperor has sent a group of the most elite Tiger Guards to him? Do you not know that the 6th Bureau swordsmen who specialize in assassinations in the Overwatch Council never leave his side? Do you not know that Northern Chi's Haitang once lived with him in Hangzhou for a period of time? Ming Lansher's voice grew louder and louder. He felt more and more that this normally shrewd brother official was truly an idiot today. He scolded, just that martial assembly? Master Yun, whom father had invited from Dongyi, had only caught a glimpse of him by West Lake before he was stabbed by someone. Presently, those useless aces in Dongyi are being chased around like stray dogs by those strange people. That is Yun Jilan. Dongyi. The descendant of Sigu Jian doesn't even have a chance to attack in front of Fan Xian. Do you think these Jiangnan martial artists can kill him? Zhou Lei's face alternated between green and white. Only now did he realize that Fan Xian was not as simple as just a powerful official. In the present world, Fan Xian was definitely one of the wealthiest people. Those who were richer than him were not as powerful as him. Those who were more powerful than him were not as powerful as him. Those who were more powerful than him were not as shameless as him. Those who were more shameless than him were not as powerful as his backer. Those who were more powerful than him had not yet been born. He did not care for giving money. He did not worry if they wanted to reduce his power in the capital. He was not afraid if they wanted to assassinate him. He did not care if they wanted to ruin his reputation. He would only use a knife to cut off their heads to vent the anger in his heart. This was an abnormal existence created decades ago. He was an invisible prince, yet he had the Overwatch Council and Ministry of Revenue that a prince could not have. Even the eldest princess, who had secretly influenced the court for over a decade, could not find a way to deal with him. What could the Ming family do? Zhou Lei comforted Ming Lansher and said, Sir Gua is also in Suzhou. Looking at his intentions, the eldest princess will help out in Jingdou. What you said earlier was reasonable, but Fan Xian is so arrogant right now. I'm afraid the crown prince and second prince will feel uncomfortable. Even if they cannot move him back to Jingdou, talking to the people in the palace will be able to suppress his arrogance. Ming Lansher nodded. He knew that he could only barely maintain the present situation. Hearing the word Gua, he still couldn't stop the veins on his forehead bulging. In a cold voice he said, Tell your superior not to get involved. Back then he hit Fan Xian with a stick in the Ministry of Justice Yamen and was chased to Jiangnan. Does he still want revenge? Don't forget, the imperial envoy is the most vengeful of young people. I just hope he doesn't get dragged down by that old white-faced Guizhang. The battle for monthly votes is truly cruel. The chase from behind is too close, so I still have to smile and extend my hand to ask for monthly votes. Chapter 359. There are actually mosquitoes in Guangzhou. This is my biggest discovery. Gradually settling down, I found that in the 2 days I was gone, the monthly vote rankings were completely red. It was truly terrifying. Everyone has a monthly vote. Are you willing to vote? Are you willing to vote? Or are you willing to vote? There were not many people in the world who had the right to worship the Qin Garden where the director of the Overwatch Council, Qin Pingping, lived. In their eyes, the Li Palace in Xinyang, the Sword Hut in Donggu City, and the Ming Garden of the Jiangnan Ming family were the 3 most beautiful and wealthiest privately owned buildings in the world. Of course, this ranking did not take into account the black and green royal palace in Shangjing, which was as beautiful as a celestial palace. There were nobles living in the Li Palace, and there was a great grandmaster in the Sword Hut. They were all existences far away from the common people. Only the Ming Garden not far from Suzhou and Jiangnan gave the common people a chance to admire it up close. The Ming family never used their power to bully others, and they did not purposely maintain the mystery of a noble family. Thus, many Jiangnan scholars and tourists from afar would all follow the wide road through the woods after they finished strolling through Suzhou. They would circle around to the outside of the city and look at the beautiful garden from a distance. Although they could not play up close, looking at it from a distance was enough to entertain the eyes. The Ming family was low-key and not mysterious. Thus, this Ming garden, which had been built for nearly 40 years, still maintained the deep imprint of their family. Every brick and tile, every grass and tree, every step and pavilion, was not extravagant or eye-catching. On the contrary, it exuded a faint sense of intimacy. Furthermore, the courtyard walls built along the foot of the mountain were not very tall. When tourists stood on the road, they could see the eaves inside. If they stood closer, they could even hear the sound of flowing water inside. Intimacy did not mean homely. Simplicity, of course, was not simple. In the eyes of those who truly knew the ropes, they would certainly be able to see that every detail in this pampered garden was impeccable. Each material and design was ingenious. In the eyes of soldiers, they could see that although this garden did not seem to have any defensive capabilities, with some simple modifications, it could become a castle that could be defended for half a year in a very short amount of time. The weather was not very good. In the chilly early spring there was a light drizzle. Young Master Ming's carriage traveled alone on the road home. He did not see the usual 2 or 3 tourists and women on an outing. The carriage came to a strange stop outside the side door. Young Master Ming pulled back a corner of the curtain and revealed a gloomy face as he looked at the front door of his own home. It seemed to be sending off a guest. A middle-aged man wearing official robes walked into his carriage with a face full of anger. Ming Lansher put down the curtain and turned his head to look at Zhou Lei. He said angrily, "Speak of Guozheng, Guozheng will arrive. How can a superior like you be so tactless?" Zhou Lei was silent. Guozheng was his direct superior. Last year, he was still the imperial censor of the left of the imperial censorate in Jingdou. After the spring examination case, Guozheng had led the 3 departments of the Ministry of Justice to jointly interrogate Fan Xian. At the time, he had relied on the eldest princess to support him and had beaten Fan Xian a few times. He wanted to force a confession out of him. How could he have thought that Fan Xian's background would be so powerful? Not only did he not bring down the Fan family, but he had also offended Prime Minister Lin, the Fan family, and the Overwatch Council. These 3 giants had taken action but did not make much of a fuss. They had easily caused the Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, to lose his position. At the same time, they had sent Guozheng to Jiangnan. The biggest loss Imperial Censor Guozheng had suffered in this life was because of Fan Xian, so he had always held a grudge. Now that Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan, it looked like Guozheng wanted to incite the Ming family to oppose the imperial envoy. That was why Ming Lansher's expression was so ugly. He thought to himself that old man Guo had moved because of a personal grudge. Today he had come to his home. He was probably here to exert pressure again. "Father, I have already given the order." Ming Lansher respectfully stood at the bottom of the stone steps in a corner of the little courtyard in Ming Garden and reported into the room. The slightly tired and comforting voice of the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, came out of the room. "Good, no matter what, you have to endure this year. Not only did the people of the clan warn us not to let the government catch us, but, Lansher, you have always been calm. Now you have to be even more careful." Ming Lansher hurriedly nodded his head in acknowledgement. Ming Qingda slowly walked out of the room with a trace of tiredness on his face. "Did you see Guozheng earlier?" Ming Lansher furrowed his brows and replied, "Yes, father. If he came so openly, I'm afraid he will fall into the eyes of the imperial envoy." Ming Qingda laughed bitterly. "Never mind. The mark on our bodies is already deep enough. If we want to tear off our relationship with that side now, it is impossible. No one will believe us. Don't think about these problems anymore." Did he come himself, or did he represent those people in the capital?" Ming Lansher asked hesitantly. Hearing these words, the wrinkles at the corners of Ming Qingda's eyes deepened. A moment later he sighed and said, "When will these officials have their own identities?" Ming Lansher's heart tightened. He knew the meaning of his father's words. It meant that Guozheng had come to pass on the eldest princess and His Highness' opinions. He looked at his father nervously. "Don't worry and don't pay attention to the intentions of the capital. His Highness wants us to trip up the imperial envoy." Ming Qingda, the wealthiest man of this generation, smiled coldly and said, This is to use us as knives. How could I be so stupid? Of course, on the surface, we still have to go along with them because no one knows what will happen in the future or who will sit on that dragon chair. Ming Lansher furrowed his brows slightly and said, the order has already been issued. As long as the imperial envoy is in Jiangnan, we will have peace. However, constantly showing weakness like this is not a solution. It is a good solution. A faint smile rose to Ming Qingda's face. Commissioner Fan is not a demon who eats people without spitting out the bones. Since he can't openly hold anything against us, he also has to be wary of the backlash from the Jiangnan officials and gentry, so he can't just bring a bowl of water and swallow us whole in one gulp. If we are more well-behaved and give him enough face, presumably he will also give us some face. This Sir Fan Jr. doesn't even give the second prince face, Ming Lansher said with a pained smile. Ming Qingda smiled self-mockingly and said, the identity of a merchant has always been on the level of history, but now it is the exact opposite. Sir Fan is the son of Lady Yi. Looking at his actions, he has always harmed officials but not the people. He also has no prejudice against merchants. He doesn't give the second prince face, but that doesn't mean he won't give us face. When all is said and done, no matter how the second prince retaliates, he is just setting a trap for him in the officialdom. We have the ability to move the power of the people. Of course, as long as the situation has not developed to the point where blades meet, we must not provoke him, Ming Qingda said. Ming Lansher was a bit annoyed. These few days, he didn't know how many times his father had said that his father's behavior on this matter was overly cautious. It made him feel uncomfortable. Although he understood the reason, he still found it difficult to accept. Seeing the faint worry on his father's face, he couldn't resist comforting him. Father, if it really can't be done, let's stop. The top and bottom of the stone steps were silent for a while. Ming Qingda, the wealthiest person in Jiangnan, slowly shook his head. A moment later, a severe light flashed through the eyes of this nearly 50-year-old elder. There are some things that I cannot stop just because I want to. He immediately smiled coldly and said, if I stop, what will the tens of thousands of people in the clan eat? Don't forget that the nobles in the capital have so many shares. Even if we don't do it, will they not stretch out their hands to ask for silver from me? The eldest princess, the crown prince, the second prince, and a few large families in the capital have gotten used to eating us. If we really stop this time, who knows what they will do? Never underestimate the greed of the royal family and officials. Ming Lansher gazed at his father and a glimmer of sympathy flashed through his heart. Who knew that the richest man in Jiangnan also had all these things he had no choice but to do? Ming Qingda said with a face full of hatred, the Ming family appears to be doing well, but in reality, we are just an old hen that can lay eggs in their eyes. If the old hen doesn't lay eggs, those who originally supported us will probably want to kill us even more than the imperial envoy and finally eat a delicious meal of chicken. The hatred on Ming Lansher's face was immediately hidden. He cursed in a low voice, if it wasn't for the fact that those people in the capital eat too much silver each year, we would be able to properly sell the palace treasury's products. It wouldn't be much worse than it is now. Even if the palace treasury is cut off by the imperial envoy, our family's businesses throughout Jiangnan will still be able to keep the clan going. Ming Qingda waved his hand, indicating that he should stop talking about this topic. He smiled coldly and said, these years, the Ming family has been doing shady business to fill those people's appetites. Perhaps Sir Fan Jr.'s trip to Jiangnan this time is a chance given to me by the heavens to let me escape from those matters. Starting from this year, we will gradually reduce our share of entering the capital. The eldest princess and the others will not be able to say anything. As long as the winning bids this time are no less than 60% of last year's, it will be fine. Don't be like the Cui family and suddenly collapse. Speaking of doing proper business, do you think the Ming family cannot do it? Ming Lansher bowed slightly and said, Father is right. He had given up on the smuggling route to Dongyi and cut off his family's overseas pirate branch. This year they would probably earn less silver outside of their accounts. They still had to pay dividends for those shares in the capital. This way, at least for this year, the clan would definitely lose money and would have to use their capital to fill in. If the imperial envoy stayed in Jiangnan, would they have to keep filling in silver? Even if they had great wealth and power, they would not be able to stop ants moving a mountain. Knowing what his son was worried about, Ming Qingda did not want to explain or comfort him too much because reality was like this. If the Ming family wanted to separate themselves from the past and protect themselves, then they had to pay the price of these 2 years. Speaking of the matter of the palace treasury opening bidding, Ming Lansher thought for a bit and then quietly said, I have met with everyone these 2 days. The everyone, In these words referred to any of the famous merchants in the Jiangnan area who had the power to participate in the palace treasury bidding. He continued to report, I have asked a few familiar families. The Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Quanzhou all know about the current situation. Although it looks like they are eyeing the palace treasury's marketing rights, their target is still the portion left behind by the Cui family. They have also promised me that they will not raise the price against us. Ming Qingda nodded and said, every family wants a piece of this golden rice bowl. However, since we have arranged things first, it is not good for them to openly oppose us, unless they don't want to do business in Jiangnan anymore. Speaking of this, only now did the master of the Ming family faintly reveal a glimmer of the confidence and pride that the richest man in Jiangnan should have. The key is those salt smugglers. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and said, those salt merchants are all ruthless characters who fish for money between life and death. They also have plenty of spare money on hand. If they participate in the bidding, it will be troublesome. Although we are not afraid, we will have to fork out a bit more silver. The court rules are very strict, 40% of the deposit. He shook his head and said, it takes up too much. I'm afraid we won't be able to make up for it in the first half of the year. The wealthiest in Jiangnan were the so-called royal merchants and salt merchants. The two sides had originally minded their own business, but now that the Cui family had fallen, who knew whether or not those salt merchants would be eyeing the palace treasury business? Those salt merchants had a lot of money in their hands and they also had backers in court. The Ming family was faintly worried about this. I have visited all of these salt merchants in Suzhou. Ming Lansher thought of what he had seen and heard these 2 days and replied with some surprise, they were very straightforward. They said they would definitely not enter the doors of the palace treasury this year. I don't know what is going on. Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He thought for a moment and then understood what was going on. He laughed self-mockingly and said, it looks like everyone knows that Sir Fan Jr. is adjusting the channels to leave the palace treasury this year, so no one dares to fight for this bowl of rice at the first opportunity. They are waiting to see how we and the imperial envoy end things. It looks like those salt merchants are preparing to enter again next year. Ming Lansher raised his head and furrowed his brows. Those salt merchants? They don't seem like people who are so overcautious. Who is their backer? Ming Qingda smiled coldly. Our Jiangnan road official Xueqing, Sir Xue. Xueqingda knows what Sir Fan means. At least in this first year, he will suppress the salt merchants and not let them enter the palace treasury to cause trouble for Sir Fan. This is the face Sir Xue is giving to Sir Fan Jr., the old Minister Fan in the capital, and the director. Ming Lansher was silent and speechless. That's fine. Ming Qingda thought for a moment and then said, being suppressed by the imperial envoy's heavenly might, no one will enter the chaos. It will be easy for us to plan. As long as we get the bidding document and get through this year safely, it will be fine. The imperial envoy will let us? Ming Lansher asked his father probingly. Ming Qingda said, as long as everything is done openly, why should we be afraid of the imperial envoy? When it comes to business, he will never be as good as us. Regarding the palace treasury opening bidding, the highest bidder wins. If someone from the palace comes, Jiangnan Road will be watching from the side. It is not something that the palace treasury transport company can handle. As long as the Ming family is willing to pay the silver, Sir Fan Jr. can't force it out of me. What I mean is, will the imperial envoy secretly incite other families to purposely raise the price? This is the simplest move. They won't lose anything, but they can make us suffer a great loss. Ming Qingda shook his head confidently. There may not be anyone on the Jiangnan Road who dares to offend Sir Fan Jr., but other than him, there may not be anyone who dares to offend the Ming family. You also went to ask around earlier. Some of the more powerful families should be watching from the side this year. If he wants to find a puppet to raise the price, Ming Qingda furrowed his brows. Bidding requires clear silver. The imperial envoy doesn't have that much silver, so he won't be able to raise it much. A faint mockery rose to his face. Don't be blinded by that chest of 130,000 liang of silver. If he wants to use silver to smash people, the officials won't be able to do it. When it came to using silver to smash people, it was the Ming family who did it the most shockingly. Thousands of images, swallowing the wind and clouds. In one go, they threw out 400,000 liang of silver with the intention of knocking Fan Xian unconscious. Although they didn't succeed, this kind of boldness was not something that the bribers in the capital could touch. The imperial envoy's father, Sir Fan Sr., is the Minister of Revenue of the Qing court. He manages the national treasury, Ming Lansher reminded with a pained smile. Ming Lansher forced a smile and reminded him, speaking of silver, his silver is much more than the Ming family. Minister Fan? Ming Qingda said with slight mockery. If the Ministry of Revenue doesn't move, then so be it. If the imperial envoy uses his father's power in order to suppress the Ming family, then this matter will be interesting. Trust me, the eldest princess has been so quiet. She must be waiting for that moment. Ming Garden immediately fell silent. Ming Lansher felt a slight chill in his heart. He knew that although his father appeared to be retreating step by step, he had long discussed with the nobles in the capital how to deal with the imperial envoy. No one knew how much blood and danger were hidden in the background of the palace treasury bidding. The matter involved the national treasury and the minister. Ming Lansher did not dare continue this topic that could not be said out loud. He calmly changed the topic and reported, based on past practice, the Taiping Money House's silver has already been prepared. Father has repeatedly warned us, so we have prepared an extra 30% of the silver this time in case we are caught unprepared when the bidding comes. The palace treasury bidding used clearly marked silver. Putting aside the 40% down payment after the deal was closed, the bidding silver itself had to be prepared in advance. Whether it was real silver or banknotes from a money house approved by the court, it had to be delivered to the special meeting place on the day the bidding opened. This was a terrifyingly large sum. For a wealthy family like the Ming family in Jiangnan, it would be difficult for them to immediately take out so much silver. After all, they could not sell land or homes. Furthermore, 60% of the bidding silver could be immediately returned after winning the bid. Royal merchants did not want to take up cash flow, so they would borrow it from outside. For large families like the Chui and Ming families, they needed a lot of silver each year during the bidding. They all used Taiping Money House to raise silver. Using produced goods as collateral had already become a custom. This year, they predicted that the palace treasury opening would be troublesome. Fan Xian would certainly think of a way to make the Ming family bleed more. Thus, the Ming family had the Taiping Money House prepare an extra 20% of the banknotes. Do not underestimate this 20%. The base number was too large. 20% was already a terrifying sum. It made the Ming family pawn off a lot of things. Taiping Money House can be trusted, Ming Qingda said in a low voice. It is an old relationship. After all, it is a business of dongi. Those people will have to rely on us for supplies. Yes, Ming Lansher replied quietly. Ming Lansher quietly replied, furthermore, we are not moving silver for no reason. Nowadays, there are always some supercilious people in Jiangnan who want to see the Ming family make a fool of themselves. If we can win the bid this time, it will be a slap to their faces. At the same time, it will let the imperial envoy understand that the family that can represent the palace treasury in such a large business is still our family. Ming Qingda glanced at him with praise and said, that is exactly what I mean. That is why we must accept this bid. The system of the court requires such a large sum of silver to be placed on the transport company. The original intention is to get rid of merchants who do not have enough power. At the same time, it also helps the Ming family sweep away a lot of opponents. Of those who can move so much silver, one family has already fallen. Who else can? Unless the imperial envoy wants to see no one take over the palace treasury goods next year. Otherwise, you can only give it to me. What we have to ensure is, first, the price not too ridiculously high. Second, the binding. There will be pressure from the capital to force the transport company to follow the rules of previous years. The 16 items will be split into 4, 6, 8, and 1. We still only want that 8. The master of the Ming family still said only want for half of the shares. The confidence in his words was unmistakable. Ming Lansher accepted wholeheartedly. The seemingly tense situation became easy under his father's analysis of the system of the court. It seemed that only his family had the ability to win the bid under the absurd rules of the court. The matter on the sea has been settled, the master of the Ming family finally said slowly. You should also have that person in the family shut up. Hearing that the matter on the sea had been settled, Ming Lansher couldn't help but feel his entire body relax. That was the Ming family's biggest weakness. As long as it was cleaned out, based on the Ming family's stable actions in Jiangnan Road, Fan Xian should not be able to find any reason to oppose him. However, hearing his father's last words, the young master of the Ming family still could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He didn't know how his father had settled the matter on the sea or how the pirates entrenched on the island had been silenced. As for the Ming family's support, a portion of it had come from the military. His father was very tight-lipped, so even he, the young master of the Ming family, did not know which side of the military the capital had mobilized this time. The matter on the sea had been resolved by his father, but he had to resolve the matter at home. A ruthless expression flashed across Ming Lansher's face. Nightfall. The young master of the Ming family was in a remote golden room in Suzhou. He lay on the bed with his eyes gazing at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking. In his arms was a naked woman lying obediently like a kitten. Her slender fingers drew circles on his bare chest. This woman was Ming Lansher's third concubine. Because of her special identity, she had always been raised outside of Ming Garden. Lansher. The concubine's breath was slightly warm. She panted and said, "I want more." Men hated to hear these words after the matter. Ming Lansher smiled coldly and said, "Want more? Don't you know how to be content?" The concubine's expression suddenly changed. She gritted her teeth and said, "What do you mean? Is it that the imperial envoy is checking hard and doesn't dare to go out on the sea? Do you feel that us two siblings are of no use?" Ming Lansher smiled slightly and turned around. In a quiet voice he said, "Little darling, you've earned so much silver for the Ming family these few years. How could it be of no use?" As his words fell, his hand slapped heavily onto the concubine's snow-white buttocks, sending up and down white waves. She pouted coquettishly. The concubine's eyes were like silk and filled with anticipation. Ming Lansher's face was full of smiles. He chopped down on the back of her neck and watched as the concubine fainted with a moan. He then used his own hands to steadily and mercilessly grip the snow-white neck that he had kissed countless times. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 360. In the early morning of the second day, a large stone and a sack were missing from the pier outside Suzhou. Someone heard the sound of a heavy object falling into the river. Immediately afterwards, they heard that the young master's third concubine had returned to her home in Chuanzhou to visit relatives. It was unknown when she would return, and the date of her return was uncertain. In the same dusky morning mist on an island far away from Chuanzhou City, taking advantage of the cover of the night before dawn, many ferocious bird-eating seagulls rushed down from the clouds and landed on the island, densely covering the entire ground. These seagulls greedily lowered their heads, using their blood-stained beaks to peck and tear at something. Because there were too many birds, the fight for food was especially violent. From time to time, seagulls would wantonly bite each other in order to fight for food territory. For a moment, the dusky island's surface was filled with bird feathers flying chaotically, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. What they fought for food was not the young birds and turtle eggs that they normally enjoyed, but human corpses. The entire island was actually littered with corpses. The pungent smell of blood rose into the sky. Fortunately, it was early spring, so there was not too much of a rotten smell. But even so, with so many corpses, it still attracted the attention of many seagulls within a radius of several hundred miles. What a feast! On the island, one could faintly see a pier-like building, but right now there were no signs of people. The dead people had their eyes wide open in fear, their white eyeballs unable to move, covered in a layer of mucus formed after death. It seemed that they never thought that someone would come to the island and kill them. With a chi sound, a seagull accurately pecked at the eyes of the corpse that could not close their eyes. With a bloody eyeball in its mouth, it proudly twisted its neck, and then immediately lowered its head, as if afraid that its companions would fight with it for food. Spreading its wings, it moved to another place, hiding under a reef, and began to eat. But it found that this food was a bit hard, and it grabbed its neck, anxiously cackling. The island was covered with corpses, flesh flying to reveal white bones, internal organs pecked out, blood, death, flying, fighting flocks of birds, the aura of death and fear pervading the sea. With one hand, he pushed the corpses above him away with some difficulty and carefully chased away those damned seagulls beside him. A pair of eyes nervously peered out from the gap. After confirming that the group of soldiers had left by ship, this island pirate who had survived the disaster crawled out of the corpses of his companions with lingering fear. The man had been stabbed in the shoulder and was badly mutilated. If it were not for his identity, which allowed him to sense the murderous aura of the soldiers very quickly and pretended to be dead and used the corpse of his comrade to cover himself, he might have died long ago. The soldiers who had come to the island should have been the pirates' companions, but they suddenly became violent. The viciousness of their actions was difficult to describe. It was not until everyone on the island was dead that the leader of the pirates realized that the Ming family had come to silence them. The person who had luckily escaped had a dark complexion. It was obvious that he had lived on the sea for many years. His face was normal, his expression was determined, and his eyes were slightly narrowed. After experiencing such a disaster, he did not seem to panic. He panted as he sat among the corpses of his companions, forcing himself to calm down. He tore off the clothes of his companions beside him and tightly bandaged his own wounds. Then he began to get up and search for fresh water and food on the island. When the soldiers left, they thought everyone was dead, so they did not destroy the water and food. They gave him a chance to live. After he recovered his spirit, the sky brightened. Facing the rising sun, the man slowly sat on the dock and looked at the flock of birds that flew and landed not far away. He looked at the wretched appearance of his companions who had been with him for many years after their deaths. His lips began to turn white, but he resisted the urge to vomit. With a flip of his hand, he picked up a jug of water and poured it into his dry mouth. The people who had died were all his companions, but he would not bury them. For one, too many people had died. It was impossible for him to bury so many bodies by himself. For pirates, if they could not be buried in the sea after they died, it was not necessarily a bad ending for them to be taken into the sky by these seagulls. Thirdly, these pirates had done a lot of evil in their daily lives. Murder and rape were common occurrences. Now that they had been killed by people and then eaten by birds, it could be considered retribution. He was called Qinghua, a native of Chuanzhou. His family background was ordinary and his ability was ordinary. He spent his years on the sea as a sailor. Sometime last year, the large ship he was on was robbed by pirates. He didn't know what method he used to luckily survive. Furthermore, he joined the inner circle of the pirates and began to become partners with them. On the roaring sea outside Chuanzhou, he did those ugly things. The pirates on this island were the largest on the sea, but strangely they did not do much business. Furthermore, the leader seemed to be purposely hiding the movements of this group. After staying on the island for half a year, Qinghua finally discovered that the main business on the island was robbing the Ming family's cargo ships heading to the Western Ocean. Each time they robbed a ship, they did not leave anyone alive, particularly the court officials responsible for escorting the ships. In just half a year's time, because of Qinghua's cool-headedness and cold-bloodedness, he received the appreciation of the leader and became a small leader among the pirates. He began to gradually understand more details and began to have the opportunity to come into contact with some very important matters. Unfortunately, at this time on this night, a group of powerful navy found the small island and slaughtered everyone on the island in an incomparably bloody manner. The morning sun brushed against his face, but it was not refreshing because he was surrounded by dead bodies and flesh. Qinghua's throat gurgled. He recognized the pirate not far in front of him who was being eaten by birds on his thigh. It was Kai Zi, who lived in the same cave as him. Qinghua's eyes blinked weakly and stood up with some difficulty. He walked to the side of Kai Zi's body and used the wooden stick in his hand to chase away the wretched seagulls. Looking at Kai Zi's body, he was speechless for a moment. In the end, he slowly said, "If I go back alive, I will take good care of your parents." After saying this, he decisively threw down his comrade's body and followed the hidden little path under the dock in another direction. The ships on the island had all sunk, but the pirate leader had left a backup plan there. He didn't know if the wooden boats were still there. Qinghua did not walk quickly, but he was particularly determined. He had to quickly return to land. Although he had survived, the subsequent reports had not been sent out. The commissioner's side should already be anxious. As he walked, he wiped away his tears and forced himself not to turn his head to look. Although the pirates behind him all had their own paths to death, after being together for half a year, even if he had a heart of stone, he still couldn't help but have some feelings. At this moment, a flame of anger rose in Qinghua's chest. He was about to get proof that the Ming family was colluding with the pirates. That group of soldiers last night had a powerful battle power. Just which faction did they belong to? Since they had come to the island to silence witnesses, it had to be some big shot in the military who could mobilize the powerful navy along the coast. Was it the Yi family? However, he did not have the right to make a judgment. He only hoped to quickly send this report back to Suzhou. The crying Qinghua was one of the 5 crows of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Chuanzhou. He was the secret agent who had once reported to Fan Xian the connection between the Ming family and the pirates. Far from this bird island, outside Suzhou in Jiangnan, in the beautiful Ming garden that seemed unwilling to be tainted by a trace of the secular world, the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, was standing respectfully in front of a chair and replying to the question of the person in the chair. The person in the chair was a woman, an old woman. Even in front of the eldest princess, Ming Qingda had no need to be so reserved and courteous. In front of this old woman he had to lower his head because this old woman was the true most powerful person in the Ming family, the matriarch, his birth mother. Many years ago, if this old woman had not been vicious and merciless, poisoned the most favored mistress to death, and then chased the seventh prince out of the family after the old master's death, the Ming family's large fortune would probably have long fallen into that person's hands. What share would Ming Qingda have? Each time Ming Qingda looked at his old mother, he could not think of the words old and virtuous. Instead he thought, being old and not dead is a thief, my seventh brother's body has probably already turned to white bones somewhere. Although he felt at ease, he also felt a chill. As long as this old woman was alive, he could not be considered the true master of the Ming family. Your actions are too slow. The old Ming matriarch looked at her son and said in a cold and merciless voice, if you wanted to wash yourself clean, then you should have started acting 2 years ago. Ming Qingda was known to be intelligent, otherwise he would not have been able to control such a large business of the Ming family. However, in front of his mother he had been criticized badly. His face heated up and he furrowed his brows. Why 2 years ago? Because 2 years ago, the palace decided to have Fan Xian marry Lin Wanner. A cold light flashed through the old woman's eyes as she spoke in a hateful voice. Ming Qingda's expression was respectful, but he had other thoughts in his heart. Even if they had guessed at that time that Fan Xian would go to Jiangnan to take charge of the palace treasury, who knew he was the emperor's illegitimate child? Who knew he was a descendant of the Yi family? Who knew he would one day lead the Overwatch Council? This old woman, it looked like she was truly muddle-headed. The old woman scolded, if I hadn't asked the military for help this time, if the Overwatch Council had found that island, given Fan Xian's personality, how would he have dealt with you? Ming Qingda laughed coldly in his heart and didn't say anything. With a respectful expression, he replied, it is truly unfilial of me to make mother worry. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 361. Time is very messy right now, so it is even messier. P.S. After lunch in the underground tunnel, I saw a few people playing chess to swindle money. I saw one person fall for the trick and move a chess piece. I spoke too much and was glared at by the hidden chess piece. I am not in a good mood and feel inferior because I don't know how to use tyrannical jinchi. These chapters are instructions. I want to learn this writing method. I don't know how it will turn out. How is Lanshi today? The old Ming matriarch looked at her son coldly and was concerned about her grandson. Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and said, the child knows what is important. Besides, he has treated her well these few years. Men, the old Ming matriarch said mockingly. In the end they are all like this. The old woman thought for a bit and then shook her head. Have Lanshi have less contact with Master Yuan? A few days ago, I heard that the imperial envoy student was opening a brothel in the city. Lanshi sold the bamboo house and felt uncomfortable. He was planning with Master Yuan on how to break the imperial envoy's business. Since we have drawn up the rules, of course we cannot do the opposite. She continued coldly, Master Yuan is the heir's woman. Have Lanshi drool less. Besides, it's not like you don't know that the Fan family hates Yuan Meng to the bone. If Fan Xian discovers that Yuan Meng is in Suzhou, he will probably kill her at the first opportunity. If Ming Shi interacts with her, it will be a bit more dangerous. Ming Qingda nodded his head in agreement and was about to leave the room when unexpectedly his old mother still kept him. After a moment of silence she asked worriedly, our arrangements are, in the end, our arrangements. I feel that after Sir Fan Jr.'s iron hand rectified the palace treasury, he shouldn't be so quiet. Ming Qingda thought for a bit and then replied calmly, Mother, don't worry. After all, our family is a large family with a reputation under heaven. Without concrete evidence, even an imperial envoy would not dare to act recklessly. The old Ming matriarch's eyebrows were all white. Her wrinkled face was filled with worldliness and coldness. In a cold voice she huffed, don't dare? He doesn't even want 400,000 liang of shining white snow silver. He must want even more. Other than the Ming family, who else in this world can give him so much silver? It was indeed so. To raise 400,000 liang of silver in such a short amount of time and deliver it to Fan Xian's hands, this kind of ability was enough to shock the world. Although Fan Xian incredibly did not accept it, this could be called the largest bribe in the world. It could already be recorded in the annals of history. Fan Xian didn't even want 400,000 liang of silver. Naturally, what he was after was even greater. I have thought about it. Ming Qingda said unhurriedly, the imperial envoy not taking money is not necessarily a bad thing. Last September, the Chui family sent 20,000 liang of silver to Yisher Tavern. Sir Fan Jr. kindly accepted it, but as soon as he turned around, the Chui family was wiped out. So, whether or not he accepted the silver does not mean this strange sir has any thoughts. Since ancient times, accepting silver to do things was a matter of course. Fan Xian accepting 20,000 liang of silver from the Chui family, not only did he not give them any benefits, but he also struck like lightning and toppled the Chui family. This action completely destroyed Fan Xian's reputation on the Jianghu for bribery. The Jiangnan merchants bore a deep grudge against this matter. The old Ming matriarch's cheeks were weak. When she smiled, they appeared particularly terrifying. She mockingly said, "The Chui family is also petty and can't even see things clearly. Their precious son offended Fan Xian in Shangjing in northern Qi and was punished to kneel in the middle of the night. They want to use 20,000 liang of silver to smooth things over?" Sir Fan Jr. did not accept this silver to do things for the Chui family. He only expressed that he no longer bore a grudge against the Shangjing matter. As for what happened afterward, who knows what happened. Speaking of this, the old woman furrowed her brows and asked, "How is Huir?" Ming Qingda replied, "Her mood is better." Under the eldest princess's secret arrangements, the Chui and Ming families were carrying out a marriage alliance. The Huir mentioned now was the wife of the third generation of the Ming family, Ming Lansher Chui Zhihui. After the Chui family had been toppled by Fan Xian, although those prominent figures had survived under Yan Xiaoyi's protection, their families had been destroyed and their people scattered. Qian Guan had left in a romantic manner. The bride who married into the Ming family could not help but feel terrified and wash her face with tears every day. After talking about some family matters, the old Ming matriarch brought the topic back to the main topic. She narrowed her eyes and said, "The shopkeeper of Taiping Money House came to say earlier that the silver our family has deposited is pretty much all prepared this time. However, a few days ago you came to tell me about Zhaoshang Money House. What is its background? How come I've never heard of it?" "I am a bit worried about Taiping Money House," Ming Qingda furrowed his brows and said. "The Shi Chanli you mentioned earlier, I heard he had withdrawn a few large sums of silver from the money house. If the court or the imperial envoy has done something, I'm afraid there will be some problems." He saw that his mother did not say anything and was deep in thought. He then continued, "Zhaoshang Money House is a new one. It only appeared in Dongyi last year. As you know, most of the money houses nowadays come from Dongyi. I've asked someone to investigate the shares and background behind them. There shouldn't be any problems. What I am thinking is that if the price of the palace treasury bidding is raised by the imperial envoy, there must be a guarantee of future cash flow. Other than Taiping Money House, there must be another way out." The old Ming matriarch opened her eyes and smiled coldly. "What kind of background makes you believe it so? Our family does palace treasury business, and the silver we need is like flowing water. How can a small money house be in such a rush? Fan Xian going to Jiangnan actually messed up your thoughts. You really don't have much of a future." Ming Qingda's heart was slightly angry, but he still maintained a smile on his face. He explained, "The main thing is that the background is reliable. Guess who is behind that Zhaoshang Money House? Don't try to be mysterious with me." The old Ming matriarch glared at her son with disgust. Ming Qingda coughed and said, "I've investigated clearly. Most of the shares in Zhaoshang Money House belong to the Shin family. The northern Qi court chased after them very hard. Back then, the Shin family's money manager fled to Dongyi. Only then did he start this business." "The Shin family?" A glimmer of interest finally appeared in the old Ming matriarch's eyes. "The provost of the Northern Qi Discipline Commission, Xin Zhong?" "That's right." The old Ming matriarch was silent for a moment and then smiled dryly. "The Northern Qi court confiscated the Shin family. Young lady Shin fled alone, and there has been a sum of wealth that has not been confiscated. Back then, Xin Zhong and the Chui family worked together to control the palace treasury smuggling to northern Qi. Who knows how much silver was saved? If it was his family, then this money house does have some financial power. Most importantly, Zhaoshang Money House's true backer is a very powerful family in Dongyi." Ming Qingda struck while the iron was hot. Xin Zhong was killed by the northern Qi emperor. Furthermore, it should have something to do with Sir Fan Jr., so Zhaoshang Money House would certainly not communicate with the court and Northern Qi. Other than the large amount of silver hidden in the Ming family's fields and manors, most of the silver used for business was stored in Taiping Money House. The seal to transfer money from Taiping Money House had always been in the hands of the old Ming matriarch. Ming Qingda had the title of master of the Ming family in name, but in reality he was just a puppet. Today he was trying his best to recommend Zhaoshang Money House to his mother, who knew what he was thinking. He didn't know if the old Ming matriarch had sensed her son's thoughts, but her smile instantly disappeared. She coldly said, "Did you not find out how much money Shi Chanli was able to move from Taiping Money House?" Ming Qingda felt a thread of cold sweat trickle down his back. He forced himself to be calm and said, "Taiping was forced by me." Their old shopkeeper had no choice but to break the rules and give me an actual number. I'm not sure where the silver Shi Chanli was able to get came from, but it should be from the Fan family. The total number should be around 50,000 liang. The old Ming matriarch huffed coldly and didn't speak. She only stared at her son. Ming Qingda became more and more nervous. After an indeterminable amount of time, the old Ming matriarch sighed and said, "Let's not rush to contact Zhaoshang. First, Shi Chanli doesn't have much silver to move. It's not enough to make trouble for us with the bidding. Second, behind Taiping Money House is Sigujien, that strange old creature. What this money house cares about the most is credibility. If you let them break the rules, that is because Sigujien needs the Ming family to send goods to Dongyi. If you turn around and start flirting with Zhaoshang Money House, how could they feel comfortable? Third, even if Zhaoshang Money House has the Shin family's money behind it, it actually doesn't amount to much. Even if there are the large clans in Dongyi you spoke of, Dongyi is also very chaotic. The so-called large clans are probably a thorn in Sigujien's side. Why should we offend Sigujien?" Ming Qingda raised his head as if he hadn't expected his mother to speak to him so warmly. The old Ming matriarch finally came to a conclusion. "We can have some small dealings with Zhaoshang Money House. As for the palace treasury, we must still go through Taiping Money House to be on the safe side." Ming Qingda didn't say anything more. He always felt that behind his mother's warmth hid a knife that could kill without seeing blood. However, he was still not satisfied in his heart. In doing business, capital was important. If everything was placed in Taiping Money House, how could that work? There was a slight deviation in the judgment of mother and son. It was this deviation that led to the troublesome matters later on. "If the imperial envoy can tolerate our family for a few years, then we will do as you say and continue like this. If he must destroy the Ming family, you know what to do." Ming Qingda bowed his head in acknowledgement. After a moment of silence he said, "The Juanshan conference is next month. I'm afraid there won't be enough time." The old Ming matriarch looked at him coldly. Killing people is not an urgent task. As for the Juanshan conference, the Ming family has raised the Jiangnan martial world for so many years and protected them under the eyes of the court for so many years. Shouldn't they have some repayment? The killing people in these words referred to killing Fan Xian. The Juanshan conference was definitely not the martial arts conference that Zhou Lei had once wanted to use against Fan Xian. There were so-called Jianghu in the Qing kingdom, but the true Jianghu was definitely not like the plain beside West Lake. There were so-called aces in the wilderness. Aces at the level of the old Jiangnan water bandits were hidden in who knew how many places. The so-called Juanshan conference was the true gathering place for these so-called aces of the Jianghu. The Juanshan conference was never known by others. No one knew exactly how powerful it was. If Fan Xian truly wanted to exterminate the Ming family, a large family that had lasted for hundreds of years would naturally have a way to counterattack. Particularly at the moment, the shadows and professional assassins of the 6th Bureau were all over Jiangnan playing hide-and-seek with the Dongyi swordsmen. The defense around Fan Xian was not as tight as it looked. Ming Qingda clearly did not agree with this suggestion and said with slight mockery, "I don't believe the Juanshan conference can kill someone that even Dongyi can't kill. Other than that, mother, don't forget that the imperial envoy himself is a top ace. He also has the Tiger Guard sent by the emperor at his side. Most importantly, that northern Qi Saint girl Haitang should also be by his side." The old Ming matriarch looked at her son with pity. Killing is putting one's life on the line. It is not a game that cares about success. If someone wants to kill our entire family and you are still considering whether or not you can kill them, then you will never have the chance to kill them. Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and replied, "Even if we can kill Fan Xian, so what? The emperor is angry and the world is shocked. Can the Ming family survive? Naturally, we have to do it flawlessly and give the people of the world a convincing answer. the old Ming matriarch said coldly. If Fan Xian can be killed, naturally, it will be Dongyi Sigujien who did it. What does it have to do with the Ming family? In any case, Sigujien has taken the blame many times these years. One more doesn't matter. Ming Qingda mockingly said, perhaps this excuse can only fool us, but it cannot fool the people under heaven, much less the Overwatch Council and the Emperor. If Fan Xian can be killed, the old Ming matriarch said expressionlessly, of course, it would be best if peace could be maintained. But if that day truly comes, I believe that the wise emperor of the Qing court will not shake the entire Jiangnan and the foundation of his rule for the sake of a dead illegitimate child. If the matter can be suppressed to the smallest degree, the emperor will certainly suppress it. A living Fan Xian is more valuable than 10 Ming families, but 10 dead Fan Xian cannot compare to a broken Ming family. The emperor does not like the Ming family, but he cannot destroy the Ming family. Thus, the emperor only hopes that this time, Fan Xian will be able to seize the Ming family completely into the hands of the court. If you can understand this, then I can rest assured in handing this family to you. A glimmer of hatred rose to the old Ming matriarch's face. When the time comes, I will throw in my life. Ming Qingda's feelings were mixed. Crying, he said, Mother, what unlucky words are you saying? He laughed coldly in his heart. The old woman was indeed old to be so muddle-headed in seeing things. If she really killed Fan Xian as she said, how could the emperor give the Ming family a way out? Throw in your life? Do you really think your old life is so valuable? To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 362. Shi Chanli walked out of the bamboo garden restaurant and made a shushing sound. He wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. The building behind him was currently being renovated. However, there was still some time before it opened for business. The business of Baoyue brothel expanding into Jiangnan had started off smoothly. However, there had been a small problem with the matter of buying girls in Suzhou. Although they had relied on the third prince's power and influence, they had not been able to invite any of the popular girls. Every time he thought of this matter, Shi Chanli felt a headache. Jiangnan girls were famous for their beauty. Why couldn't they find some decent girls? Had they all been hidden away by someone? Originally there had been other ways. He had also gone to the broker shop to look. However, the girls the brokers enthusiastically recommended were all pitiful girls who had escaped from Jiangbei. Although it was their parents who were selling them, they had not been able to extract their money. Shi Chanli could not bring himself to do it. He was also afraid that Fan Xian would be angry. Speaking of his teacher, Shi Chanli's head swelled even more. He really didn't know what that young master was thinking. After returning from the palace treasury the day before yesterday, he had dove head first into the Hua garden that the salt merchant had given him. He had shut himself inside all day and did not even seem to have made any preparations for the palace treasury's opening bid that was about to arrive. Shi Chanli was wearing a cotton robe. Although he now had the identity of a merchant, he still could not shake off the scholarly mannerisms that his decades of bitter study had nurtured. His hand stroked the smooth walls of the carriage, but he did not get in. The guard beside the carriage looked at him curiously. Countless people passed by beside the carriage. On the busy streets of Suzhou, Shi Chanli's mind suddenly wandered. He looked at the peaceful and happy Jiangnan commoners and furrowed his brows slightly. Thinking back to what had happened this year, he suddenly felt a glimmer of fear toward his own choice. After Yang Wanli's conversation in Hangzhou, although these people still saw Fan Xian as their leader and firmly headed toward that unknown future, Shi Chanli was different from those three schoolmates. However, Shi Chanli was different from those three schoolmates. He had already lost the thought of an official career and began to help Fan Xian take care of some secret matters. He also knew some secret information, so he increasingly felt that Fan Xian was difficult to grasp. They wanted to help the world and provide for the people, but what exactly did their teacher think? He understood that the expansion of Baoyue brothel was, on one hand, to make it convenient for Fan Xian outside of the Overwatch Council to have a second source of information. But, more importantly, it was to make it convenient for Fan Xian to launder money in the future. Perhaps what his teacher had done was for a good purpose, but in the process of reaching this goal, perhaps many sacrifices had to be made. For example, the lives of innocent people, the righteousness that scholars always believed in, and the conscience that everyone seemed to have. At this point, Shi Chanli knew that Fan Xian was already a powerful official and not the righteous official he had hoped for. He also understood that if he wanted to be a righteous official who could leave his name in the annals of history, seizing power was also a necessary part. In this process, the word righteous would appear too stupid. This was a philosophical dilemma. Sure, Chanli sank into it, but he could not find an answer. He could only silently get into the carriage and bet on his trust in his teacher. The carriage was headed toward Taiping Money House. Recently, Sher Chanli had been moving silver everywhere there. That 50,000 liang of silver truly terrified him. Sir Fan Jr.'s silver was a bit too much. He could only hope that after he obtained enough power and money, he would still remember what he had thought in the beginning and do something for the world. I know very well what I am doing. Fan Xian looked at Yang Wanli in front of him with a calm expression. After returning to Suzhou from the palace treasury, he had sent Yang Wanli over. Although logically speaking, Yang Wanli could not leave his post without permission and Fan Xian had given random orders, he had the identity of an imperial envoy. Presumably, the officials in Fujian County as well as the people in Shangzhou would not dare to criticize Yang Wanli too much. Yang Wanli sighed and said, "Teacher, I am just worried that the officialdom is dangerous and can tempt one to desire luxury and power." Although he did not finish, the meaning was already clear. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Fan Xian liked Yang Wanli the most because he spoke directly and always remembered the hardships of his childhood. He was upright and plain-spoken. He did not care about anything and he was incorruptible and self-restrained. Although Fan Xian was not an upright official, this did not stop him from admiring upright officials. Although Sher Chanli's heart was clear, he was only willing to keep the matter in his heart. As for the other 2, Cheng Jialan was overly mediocre and sought stability. Only Ho Jichang, a scholar who had once been as famous as He Zhongwei in Jingdou, had a sharp mind and was truly a good choice to handle matters. It was a pity that he was far away in another province and Fan Xian could not use him for a while. He waved his hand to stop Yang Wanli from worrying too much. He smiled and said, "My nature is firm, why would I need you to worry? Don't always be afraid that I will slide into the abyss of evil. Once I get used to the darkness, I won't be able to see the light." Yang Wanli was slightly startled. He then thought about what kind of person his teacher was. How could he be so useless? Perhaps he had been worrying too much. "Money is only a tool," Fan Xian said. "Anyone who is greedy will always need to use money to exchange for some kind of physical or psychological pleasure. For a person who has enough money, greed for money, if it is not to count silver, then it must be for some other purpose." Yang Wanli shook his head and said, "Greed is difficult to satisfy. There are too many such things in the world." Although Fan Xian often said strange words, Yang Wanli was already used to it. In any case, he understood the general meaning. "I'm not a eunuch," Fan Xian said with a smile. "I don't have any special interest in things like silver." Yang Wanli smiled bitterly and thought, if you don't love silver, then why use Sher Chanli's name to run a brothel? In particular, the operation against the Ming family and the palace treasury this time was clearly to steal silver. When the time came, how much would be handed back to the court? Fan Xian completely ignored his student's silent criticism and said straightforwardly, "I called you over this time because there are some things I need to tell you." Although Yang Wanli disapproved of some of Fan Xian's methods of doing things and felt conflicted in his heart, for the things Fan Xian gave him, as long as they did not violate the law, he would carry them out with great care and effort. "Please give me your orders." He looked at Fan Xian's serious expression and thought it was a matter of government, so he changed the way he addressed him and replied very seriously. Fan Xian glanced at him and said carefully, "There will be an appointment coming from the capital immediately. You will be transferred to the Ministry of Works. I'm letting you know in advance so you won't be confused." Hearing these words, Yang Wanli was startled and truly confused. He was doing well in Fujian County. According to tradition, he would be able to enter the province next year. Not only did his career look good, it was also the right path. Although he was a loyal person, it was not that he did not understand the entanglements in the officialdom. Of course, he knew why his teacher had sent the 3 of them to the provinces after the spring examinations and not find a way to stay in the various ministries in Jingdou. Because the Fan family's power in Jingdou was already strong enough, they needed some help in the provinces. This was the reason Yang Wanli had been sent to Fujian County. Hearing that he was going to be transferred to the Ministry of Works, Yang Wanli was a bit confused. Given his rank, he could still help his teacher do some things outside the capital. After returning to the capital, his official position would be so low that he couldn't even speak. He didn't know what deep meaning his teacher had in this arrangement. Seeing his confusion, Fan Xian explained in a quiet voice, Entering the Ministry of Works from a local place, according to tradition you will move up half a rank. Don't think this is something I did again. As for why I'm letting you enter the Ministry of Works, you don't need to guess too much. Yang Wanli nodded with confusion. There are 4 departments in the Ministry of Works. Fan Xian stared into his eyes and said. During the new policies in the first year of the Qing calendar, the Ministry of Water was changed to the Ministry of Clear Water. This time, you will be entering the Ministry of Clear Water. Yang Wanli opened his mouth slightly, thinking that he could guess what his teacher was preparing to do. His tender face flushed red as he said, Darren, although the repair of the river works costs a lot of silver, this silver cannot be touched. Fan Xian paused and immediately scolded laughingly, What kind of pig brain do you have? Did the scolding in Hangzhou not wake you up? Only now did Yang Wanli come to his senses. He thought that even if his teacher wanted to be greedy, he would not care about the Jiangnan Ming family and palace treasury. How could he extend his hand to the river works? He must have thought wrong. He sighed repeatedly with great shame. Fan Xian glared at him in annoyance and sighed. You need to change your rash personality. It's fine in front of me, but after you enter the Ministry of Works, you will still be like this in front of those incomparably crafty officials. How can I be at ease letting you go? Yang Wanli gritted his teeth and said, I will listen to teacher. In the future I will be more steady. Teacher, please explain. Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He slowly raised his head and stared into Yang Wanli's eyes. He stared until Yang Wanli's heart was a little scared. Only then did he calmly say, The Ministry of Clear Water is responsible for examining and distributing the silver that the court allocates to control the rivers along the river. The amount is very large, particularly after the river burst its banks last year and countless people died. This year, as long as the situation of the court's national treasury improves slightly, the emperor will certainly allocate enough real silver. I want you to go to the Ministry of Clear Water because I want you to look after this silver. Yang Wanli froze in his chair and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. River works? The banks? Flood. A flood of silver? Everyone knew that river transport was the most expensive business in a country's economy and people's lives. Particularly over the past dozen years, the Qing kingdom had repaired the river every year and breached the dikes every year. Silver poured in like a flood, but not a single sound was heard. On one hand, the heavens did not give them face. On the other hand, it was a man-made disaster. From the Ministry of Works in Jingdo to the officials of the river transport governor's manor and below, no one knew how much they had benefited from this enormous amount of silver. The disaster of corruption was greater than a flood. Of course, the emperor also knew of this matter. 4 years ago, the river burst its banks. After the Overwatch Council investigated in detail, the current court killed the river transport governor at that time. It was said that the river transport governor's family had accumulated wealth for the country and had the Empress Dowager as his backer. However, despite the Qing emperor's ruthlessness, he still could not stop the corruption of the river works. The position of the river transport governor had been empty for 4 years. No one had taken it. In addition, in recent years the income of the palace treasury had been declining year by year. Fighting on 2 fronts, the national treasury was empty, and the irrigation facilities on both sides of the river had not been repaired for a long time. This caused the terrifying consequences of the river bursting last year. Something that even the emperor could not completely resolve, for him to do? Yang Wanli had no choice but to be stupid. He knew his own limitations. Perhaps he had the ability to govern a county or a province, but governing a river involved the lives and deaths of tens of thousands of people. He did not dare to say such big words. Thus, he fearfully bowed in front of Fan Xian and repeatedly asked to be excused. Fan Xian looked at him and shook his head. What are you panicking about? I'm just asking you to look at the silver, not asking you to fill the river with earth. In order to protect the safety of the river, what is there to fear even if Wanli has to fill the river with earth? Yang Wanli smiled bitterly and replied, However, since you are thinking about the river works, you know this matter has great implications. If there is the slightest mistake, it will be a tragic matter of drowning tens of thousands of people. I truly do not dare to accept. Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, Don't you want to be an upright official whose name will go down in history? I am asking you to go to the darkest nest of corrupt officials in the Qing court, yet you don't dare to go? Yang Wanli's face reddened and he slowly lowered his head. Fan Xian didn't say anything more. He only looked at him coldly. After a long time, Yang Wanli finally raised his head bravely. Gritting his teeth he said, As you wish, sir. He thought to himself that even if he was killed in the river transport yamen, he would at least be able to put in some effort. Just as his teacher had said, since he was working for the benefit of the world, why should he cherish his body? A glimmer of admiration flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Evenly he said, to be willing to be cut and dare to pull the governor down from his horse. Yang Wanli paused and thought these words were a bit strange. Fan Xian hid his smile and said, furthermore, the position of the river transport governor has always been empty. With the Fan family and the Overwatch Council watching you, although the river transport yamen is as deep as a dragon's pool, if those corrupt officials want to use underhanded methods to deal with you, they will have to see if I agree or not. Yang Wanli thought about it. Right, he had such a powerful backer as his teacher. Why would he be afraid of those people? His mood changed quickly. An eager expression immediately rose to his face. It was as if he was ready to rush back to Jingdo to report and then quickly rush to the banks of the river to see if the court silver was being spent properly. Fan Xian looked at his expression and couldn't resist smiling. Shortly after, he said seriously, there is one thing you have to remember clearly. Teacher, please instruct me. You can only manage silver, not the river works. Fan Xian looked at him very seriously. Yang Wanli paused slightly. He thought that repairing the river was beneficial to the country and the people, so why couldn't he do it? Fan Xian stared into his eyes and said seriously, repairing the river will naturally be done by professional Ministry of Works officials. You just have to make sure the silver is used in the right way. You absolutely cannot manage the river works. In this world, the most terrifying thing is for outsiders to manage insiders. Do you think repairing the river is as simple as filling in the embankments? Yang Wanli's face revealed an expression that was as it should be. Fan Xian sighed in his heart and warned, I'm letting you go to the Ministry of Works because of your clear-headedness and sincerity. You can't tolerate sand in your eyes. I'm not relying on your half-baked river management skills. He saw that although Yang Wanli had agreed, he still didn't seem to be listening. In a cold voice, he smiled coldly and said, don't think I'm joking. Yang Wanli listened carefully. Yang Wanli unconsciously straightened his body. Fan Xian stared at him and said each word clearly, if I find out that you dare to criticize the specific matters of repairing the river works and dare to use my reputation to give random ideas, I will immediately send people to chop you into 36 pieces. Yang Wanli was forced by Fan Xian's cold gaze. His body trembled. He knew that his teacher was giving instructions very seriously. He quickly corrected his attitude and agreed sincerely. The two of them then explained the specific details of his appointment, as well as the things he could trust in the river transport governor's yamen. Only now did Fan Xian truly believe that Yang Wanli was not as stupid as his impression of him in the past. Regarding the matters he had given him, he should be able to smoothly resolve them. Thus, he began to talk about the main point of their conversation. I'm letting you go to the Ministry of Clear Water. I don't actually expect you to be able to get rid of the corruption that has existed for a long time in the river works, Fan Xian said thoughtfully. The Overwatch Council also has a number of spies there, but there are too many officials. Their connections to the court are too deep. Pulling one hair will affect the whole body. It is not easy to deal with. Although Yang Wanli was surprised, he had finally learned to be smart. He didn't ask questions and instead listened quietly. Thus, the silver the court pulls out into the river, in the end it will never be enough, Fan Xian said mockingly. Regardless of whether you believe it or not, in the end, it will become such a situation. Even if the emperor pulls out 2 million liang of silver, the Ministry of Works will still cry that it is not enough. Originally, if we had planned slowly, it was not completely impossible to turn this situation around, Fan Xian said with narrowed eyes. However, there is not enough time. Last year, the river burst its banks and washed away a number of dams, making the long-neglected dikes and water conservancy facilities on both sides increasingly unbearable. When the water dried up last winter, it was a good time to repair the river. However, at that time, there was not much silver in the national treasury. What do we do this year? If there is no flood this year, then it is the Qing court's good luck, Fan Xian said with narrowed eyes. If there is another flood, then we won't be able to hold out. Furthermore, we still have to rely on those officials for the river works, so it is not suitable for the Overwatch Council to make any big moves. Only now did Yang Wanli faintly realize that his teacher's body was in Suzhou, but his heart was above the people of the world. His heart warmed slightly. Probingly he said, there is not enough silver in the national treasury. Furthermore, it is already spring. Even if we can survive the spring floods, we will still need silver later. This is the true reason I have you go to the Ministry of Works, Fan Xian said calmly. I will raise a large amount of silver. Most of it will go through the Ministry of Revenue into the National Treasury and then to the River Transport Yamen. However, as I said earlier, there will be harsh deductions along the way, so I don't know how much will be left. Most importantly, I'm afraid there won't be enough time, so I will directly move the other portion of silver to the River Transport Yamen for you to take over. Yang Wanli paled in shock. The large amount of silver Fan Xian spoke of was certainly a terrifying amount. Presumably, it had been taken from the palace treasury. However, this amount of silver, logically speaking, should belong to the palace treasury and then, according to the emperor's edict, move it to the national treasury. For Fan Xian to directly move the silver, at the very least this was using the national treasury for personal gain. At the very most it was no different from rebellion. Time is too tight, Fan Xian said helplessly. Fan Xian helplessly said, in the past the movement of silver took more than half a year. At that time, damn it, the river would have burst its banks long ago. Bureaucracy kills people. At this time, Yang Wanli knew that Fan Xian's risky and unprofitable method was certainly not for his own benefit. Rather, it was because he wanted the matter of the river repair to quickly step onto the right path. Although he was moved in his heart, he was more worried about his teacher. He anxiously urged, "Sir, you have to be careful in this matter. If someone finds out, what will we do?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "What are you afraid of? Could the emperor bear to kill me?" Yang Wanli thought about it. It was indeed the case. Although it was impossible to explain the source of this silver, as long as it was used on the river works and not used to privately raise death soldiers, how could the emperor make life difficult for his own son? The source of the silver? He asked carefully. In reality, he knew that the source of the silver could not see the light of day. However, if he didn't ask clearly, he would always feel uneasy. Swindling, cheating, stealing, I like to eat rich people, Fan Xian said with a smile. The palace treasury is about to start the bidding. You don't have to worry about the silver. The important thing is to use this silver well. The 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council will help you handle the specific matters. There will also be people in the Ministry of Works who will help you cover it up. You don't have to worry too much. Yang Wanli understood as soon as he heard this. For such a large sum of money to be poured into the river works through unconventional channels, of course, the upper echelons of the court had to turn a blind eye to it. Perhaps the mastermind was his teacher's father, the Minister of Revenue, who had always seemed somewhat quiet. My silver will increase, Fan Xian sighed. Fan Xian sighed and said, there will be more and more every year, so what I am worried about now is not how to earn money, but how to spend it and how to spend it happily. These words were a bit arrogant. However, he had yet to swindle the Ming family's silver into his hands, yet he was already thinking about how to spend it. This matter was inevitably a bit absurd. The position of River Transport Governor has been vacant for 4 years. Fan Xian smiled slightly at his most stubborn student. I hope that in the near future, you will be the Qing Kingdom's River Transport Governor. Furthermore, you will be the first non-greedy river transport governor in history. Yang Wanli stood proudly. A red sun rose in his chest and lofty sentiments rose. The reason he had to move Suzhou's silver into the river works was to make the most of the time. Before the autumn floods, he had to make the minimum repairs to the riverbanks riddled with holes. Naturally, Yang Wanli did not want to stay any longer. He hurriedly took his leave. He had to return to Fujian County to give his report. He also had to report to the capital and return to the river transport yamen. These tens of thousands of li were indeed tens of thousands of li. Fan Xian sat comfortably in the chair and waited for the person who was about to arrive. He didn't have to wait long before Hai Tang pushed open the door and walked in. She looked at Fan Xian like she was looking at a god. A moment later, she quietly said, "The question is, where did you get so much silver?" "Tomorrow the palace treasury will open the bids," Fan Xian said with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and said, "If Xia Qifei is not an idiot, he will certainly be able to raise the price to a suitable level. 40% of the deposit is not a small sum. Since the Ming family has so honestly handed over the silver to the transport company with both hands, I have to spend it to be worthy of the Ming family." Hai Tang shook her head and said, "The imperial censor has already come from the capital. The Jiangnan governor's manor will also send people to listen. You won't be able to move much of this silver." She continued, "Even if Xia Qifei is able to take over the Cui family's route, it will still take at least 7 months for the goods to turn into cash." Fan Xian smiled and gazed at the girl. "In any case, it is to transport goods to the north. In any case, your emperor is going to pay up. Furthermore, my transport company Yamen has enough silver stored away. After the matter is settled, I will transfer some silver from Taiping Money House to use first. Presumably you won't have too many objections. Haitang immediately smiled bitterly and said, "That is not bad. It is only 7 months. You can always pay it back. However, the emperor does not know of your arrangements. Furthermore, using the silver that the Qi internal court has worked so hard to save for so many years to build a river for the Qing kingdom, no matter how you look at it, this cannot be justified, right? This matter could not be justified. If the clever little emperor of northern Qi knew of Fan Xian's way of playing, he would probably be so angry he would vomit blood." Fan Xian spread out his hands and gazed at Haitang with a compassionate expression. "Duo, you once said that the people of the world are all favored by heaven. We have to treat them as people. If the river bursts its banks and drowns the Qing people, are they not people? Do you have the heart to watch this happen? The silver of the northern Qi internal court, the silver of the Ming family, the silver of the court, are they not all the silver of the people of the world? I am only taking a great risk to use it on the people of the world." "What is wrong with that?" Haitang smiled slightly and nodded. "Of course, it is not bad to use the silver of the people of the world on the people of the world. However, if in the future there is a time of famine in the Qi territory, I hope that Sir Fan will not be stingy with your assistance." Fan Xian didn't even think about it. With a smile on his face he said, "Of course." It seemed that Haitang had not expected him to answer so quickly. She couldn't help but freeze to the spot. She didn't know if he truly thought this or if he was just casually making a joke. After all, there were too few people in this world who truly did not have the concept of a country. Haitang shook her head and said, "Let's not talk about the matter of silver for now. However, you truly surprised me today. I have seen many officials and powerful officials who are greedy for silver, but I truly did not think that you would use your greedy silver on such a matter." Fan Xian slowly raised his head and said with a not quite there smile, "Is it hard to understand? In reality, it is very easy to understand. Just as I said to Wanli earlier, silver is only a tool. It is only a method used to obtain physical and psychological pleasure. Earning silver is difficult and spending silver is even more difficult. How can one spend it comfortably? Some people like to buy horses, some like to buy beautiful women, some like to buy manors to become landowners, and some like to buy official positions. And for me these are all too simple matters," Fan Xian continued. "Since I am going to spend silver to buy pleasure, then I have to spend the largest amount of silver to buy the greatest pleasure in the world. Pleasure alone, pleasure for all, which is pleasure." Fan Xian began to use old Master Meng to educate Haitang. Haitang smiled slightly and sat down. "So, when all is said and done, you just want to make yourself happier. Just like you mentioned in your letters before, you hope that this world can be more beautiful. If you live in it, you will also be more at ease. Correct?" Fan Xian said with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Even if you live in luxury and gather power in one body, once the country falls and people die, how can you enjoy it? Even if you sing loudly, have beauty to accompany you, and travel the world without a trace of cloud, your body is surrounded by hungry corpses and black crows pecking at you. How can you be happy? Raising a dog to bite people and laughing loudly, this is a very low-quality life of a hedonistic young master. I cannot be happy." In the end he came to a conclusion. One person is good but tens of thousands are not. This is not good, only when everyone is good is it truly good. Haitang stared into his eyes and suddenly shook her head helplessly. "I really don't know which of your words are true and which are false. Just what kind of person are you?" Fan Xian thought for a bit and then said sincerely, "Why has no one ever believed me? Actually, I'm a good person." Haitang lowered her head and hid her lake-like clear eyes. In a quiet voice she said, "Good person, tomorrow the palace treasury opens the bidding. Do you plan to continue being a good person?" Fan Xian's expression calmed. "Sometimes not only am I not a good person, I am also an evil person, a butcher. However, these two do not conflict." Haitang did not continue this topic. She seemed to ask very casually, "These 2 mornings, you have begun to resume your cultivation again. Is the condition of your Jinqi better?" In reality, starting from the lakeside in the west of Hangzhou, Fan Xian's daily routine meditation at dawn and dusk had begun to recover. However, for some reason he unconsciously avoided Haitang. It was as if there were some things he was hiding from her. Now that Haitang had asked this to his face, Fan Xian did not respond. He only smiled and shook his head. Haitang smiled faintly and asked again, "The idea of spending money you spoke of earlier is indeed new. However, there are many injustices in the world and there are many poor and needy people. Why did you choose the river works first? Charitable halls will gradually open in various places. The court will think of a way to settle the refugees in the Jiangbei area. The emperor and I have discussed this before, Fan Xian said calmly. I must hold at least a portion of the palace treasury silver in my own hands and then use it to do some appropriate things. Is this the last wish of some elder? Haitang asked curiously. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. You still haven't answered me. Why did you choose the river works first? Fan Xian still did not answer. A picture appeared out of thin air in his mind. In the picture, a beautiful yellow-robed woman was standing on a rock by the river. Her face was full of worry as she looked at the ferocious flood dragon in the river and the laborious commoners on the other side of the river bank. Rest first, he said quietly. Tomorrow the palace treasury opens. There is still a battle to fight. Please everyone vote for me. The situation is tense and the mood is exciting. It is as if I have returned to the month of the new book. Scratch my head. The month of the new book is actually being nagged at by the situation of the battle is not as tense as it is now. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 363. It was said to be an auspicious day on the 22nd day of the third month in the 6th year of the Qing calendar. Thus, after the imperial envoy arrived in Jiangnan, the palace treasury's first New Year opening bid was chosen for this day. The spring sunshine was bright and beautiful, and the gentle breeze brought warmth. The young masters and ladies in Suzhou all headed out for a walk. The grass on the wide road had not yet grown, and the birds had not yet flown, but they were already startled. Outside the city, there were green mountains everywhere and threads of green water, making it a good place for men and women to hook up. The air was filled with a fresh and beautiful smell. Suzhou was another scene. South of the Jiangnan governor's manor was the Palace Treasury Transport Company's permanent Suzhou Yamen. Regardless of whether it was the yamen of the various departments of Jiangnan Road or the yamen of the Suzhou government, they were all opened in this area. It was a place where the atmosphere of officials gathered. Usually, it was heavily guarded and the most important place to guard. Today, one could only see soldiers patrolling the two sides of the street, each holding a long spear in their hand. There were also bailiffs who forced themselves to be alert and vigilantly watched the movements of all sides in the thick spring sleepiness. This large area had already been tightly controlled. Every year on the opening day of the palace treasury, it was always like this. First, it was because the large merchants from all over brought too much silver. Second, it was because other than the officials of the transport company, there were also eunuchs sent by the palace to supervise the opening of the palace treasury. The governor of Jiangnan Road would also be present to listen. At this time, the group of imperial censorate censors who had nothing to do all day could not be missing. There was too much silver gathered here today and too many high-ranking officials, so the issue of safety became the most important. Fortunately, Suzhou was deep by the banks of the Yangtze River. The Qing kingdom's military was powerful, so no power dared to make any probing moves. Even the thieves in Suzhou had long been chased out of the city. It was a good time to collect money during the Qingming festival. As usual, the transport company had vacated a large courtyard. This courtyard was incomparably wide. Along the two sides of the main hall were a row of small rooms. It was said to have been the examination venue for students in the Jiangnan area in the previous dynasty. Later, when the Qing emperor inspected the palace treasury in the south, he found that this kind of layout was suitable for holding bids. Thus, he set it here and formed the usual practice. Usually, this courtyard was empty in the highest area of Suzhou. It was loaned by the transport company to the governor's manor yamen to manage accounts. However, it was returned to the transport company yamen in March. It had been renovated and cleaned since more than 10 days ago. Now the house was extremely bright and clean. There were soldiers standing guard outside the house, and a few plain-looking guards stood by the side of the hall in the courtyard. The light in the hall was a little dim, and one could only vaguely see a row of 4 armchairs placed behind a table. When the Suzhou branch of the capital Xingfeng restaurant on South Street ran out of jietang buns, the door to this house finally opened. The merchants from various states did not panic. They ascended the stairs in an orderly manner, turning a blind eye to the vigilant gazes of the soldiers around them. After more than 10 years, they had long understood this whole set of procedures. Behind a merchant was often a family, as well as the political factions behind the family. The opening of the palace treasury was a matter of great importance, so the representatives who came today were all prominent figures in their families. However, there were not many of them. These merchants all brought their own attendants and accountants behind them. They also carried boxes, account books, and other related tools. Walking in front of everyone was, of course, the representative of the Ming family. Since last year, the Ming family had already handed most of their power to young Master Ming Launcher's hands. The old Ming master rarely showed his face in public. What shocked many of the merchants was that the old Ming master, Ming Qingda, had personally come to the large courtyard. Ming Qingda narrowed his tired eyes and raised his hands in greeting to his colleagues. He stroked the long beard on his chin and walked proudly through the door. The Jiangnan merchants faintly saw the Ming family as their leader. They quickly returned the greeting and followed behind him through the door. No one felt a glimmer of unease. Since it was the palace treasury bidding, of course the Ming family would go first. Everyone did not understand why the Ming family would be so cautious today and even invite the old master. Occasionally, someone would think of the new head of the transport company in the palace treasury, the imperial envoy. They would also think of the young master of the Ming family communicating endlessly in secret this month. Only then did they faintly guess that today's palace treasury bidding would probably not be as smooth as in previous years, nor would it be as bright and joyous as today's spring scenery. The 2 rows of rooms under the eaves had long been pasted with names. The families entered one by one. The Ming family was in the first large room on the left. They had brought the most people, a full 16 shopkeepers and waiters. Once they entered the room, there were servants arranged by the transport company to pour them tea, hand over warm towels, and some exquisite pastries. Although it was the government that had opened the bidding, they knew that these rich people had to be well received. Using the words Fan Xian had said with a smile after learning of the previous arrangements, if they were going to kill a pig, they had to fatten it up first. Ming Qingda sat steadily in his chair. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the light scattering through the courtyard outside. Before entering the courtyard, he had made eye contact with the merchants and knew that everyone's thoughts were the same. In the face of profit, no one was willing to raise the price, particularly those merchants. They did not dare to offend him. Thinking of this, Ming Qingda's heart relaxed slightly. He asked in a low voice, "How much longer?" Ming Launcher stood obediently by his father's side. He lowered his body and said, "Soon." He stretched out a pair of white hands and brought the tea in front of his father. His hands were so clean it was as if they had never been stained with blood. Ming Qingda nodded. Since the court was still inventing bids and no one in the world had the wealth to fight with him, there shouldn't be much difference from previous years. For some reason his lips were still a bit dry. Perhaps it was because he was gradually getting older, and his energy was always lacking. Thinking of this, a strange emotion welled up in the master of the Ming family's heart. His mother was already so old, why was her body still so healthy? Ming Qingda unconsciously swept his gaze across and easily identified the families these rooms represented. Although he had rarely personally entered the market these years, his friendship with the older generation was still there. The families that had come today were all descendants of the second generation. Presumably, they knew that of the 16 palace treasury bids, the Chui family could fight for the ones the Ming family had vacated. As for the 8 that the Ming family had set in stone, they could not move. However, the door to the last room under the eaves was still closed. No one knew which family had sent in their bid, but the person had not arrived yet. Ming Qingda took a sip of tea and moistened his throat. He furrowed his brows and said, "Whose family is B6? It's about to start, why hasn't the person arrived yet?" Ming Launcher was startled and was unable to reply. He had clearly investigated in detail, so why was that room still empty? Some kind of warning sign began to grow in Ming Qingda's heart. After Fan Xian returned the 400,000 liang banknotes, he sank into silence. He didn't know what exactly the imperial envoy was thinking. He glanced at his son and said with slight anger, "When doing things, you have to be watertight. You haven't even checked the person clearly. What if something goes wrong later?" Ming Launcher's expression was slightly embarrassed. He could only admit his mistake, but he was not satisfied in his heart. These figures of wealthy families all had this bad habit of not saying what they thought. He probingly said, "Could it be a salt merchant? They have always done things strangely. Perhaps they are also envious this time." Ming Qingda's expression was dark. He shook his head and said, "It's not a salt merchant. First they gave us a promise. Second, Sir Shui also once gave me a promise." This master of the Ming family looked at the empty room across from him. He looked at the tightly shut door and the faint coldness seeping through the glass window. A powerful unease welled up in his heart. It is truly a pity this time. In the study of the Jiangnan governor's manor, an advisor sighed. The Cui family has left 6 empty, yet it is not convenient for us to interfere. We can only watch as so much silver is divided up by the Ming family and those local rich landlords. It is truly a pity. The governor of Jiangnan Road, first-level official Sir Xueqing, wore a slight smile on his face and did not say anything. The advisor sitting beside him also showed a look of pity and said, Yang Jimei came a few times a few days ago. He was still hoping that you could help him put in a good word for him in front of Sir Fan Jr. His family has been in the salt business for generations. Now, looking at the fat meat of the palace treasury, he is also hungry. Yang Jimei was the largest salt merchant in the 2 Huai rivers, or rather a salt smuggler. He had always carefully curried favor with the governor's manor. Xueqing thought for a bit and then smiled. Hungry? Who isn't hungry? Yang Jimei, that old killing talent. I asked him for such a good Hua garden, but he stubbornly refused to give it to me. This time he insists on going through my hands to give it to Fan Xian as a residence. Do you think I don't know what he is thinking? Does Sir Fan not know? As the Jiangnan governor, he controlled 1/7 of the world's military and civil affairs. His power was strong and powerful, and he had many eyes and ears. Thinking of something, he couldn't help but sigh. Sir Fan will certainly have to give Yang Jimei some face in the future, but the matter of the palace treasury, he won't have much of a chance. The advisor asked curiously, what exactly is the imperial envoy thinking? Who exactly is he planning to give the 6 empty spots to? The smile on Xueqing's face gradually faded. Actually, there is no need to ask. Since the emperor sent him to Jiangnan, these 6 spots will naturally be prepared by him. He then smiled coldly and said, never mind these 6 spots, I think it will be very difficult for the Ming family to keep their own 8 spots. The advisor furrowed his brows deeply and said, I just don't know which family Sir Fan Jr. has chosen this time. Xueqing smiled mockingly. He ruled over Jiangnan, so he knew what Fan Xian had done. He smiled and said, I'm afraid none of you would have thought of that choice. This imperial envoy is indeed very powerful. He did not choose a spokesperson from among the merchants and instead poached someone from the wilderness. If that guy had swaggered into Suching on a normal day, I would probably have thrown him into prison and demanded some benefits. The advisor did not know the inside story and laughed dryly. He was still a bit reluctant in his heart and probingly asked, concerning the matter of opening the palace treasury, did the imperial envoy not say anything to you? According to the customs of officialdom, a fat piece of meat like the palace treasury could not be swallowed up by a single faction of officials, particularly since Xueqing's position was high and deeply rooted in Jiangnan. No matter how arrogant Fan Xian was, he still had to show some goodwill to the governor's manor. Xueqing furrowed his brows slightly and shook his head. Naturally, Sir Fan Jr. has mentioned this matter. Although he is young, he does things very smoothly. Minister Fan and Director Chen have taught him well. However, I had no choice this time and could only politely decline Sir Fan Jr.'s good intentions. Ah! The advisor cried out in surprise. Politely decline good intentions? As long as Fan Xian opened his mouth, this small good intentions would probably be worth at least a few 100,000 liang of silver. When did the governor become so incorruptible and self-restrained? Had he learned to change his face? Xueqing smiled self-mockingly and stood up. Although it is close, we should still leave first. Sir Fan Jr. is waiting in the courtyard, as is Guizheng, that white-faced old man. The eunuchs from the palace are also coming with an edict. We can't be too slow. He did not explain to the advisors who were even closer to him than his wife why he had politely declined Fan Xian's good intentions. Xueqing knew that although the palace treasury appeared to be a contest between Fan Xian and the eldest princess, there was actually a deeper meaning behind it. Just how should the princes be ranked? This was already beginning to become a thorny problem. Xueqing's identity did not allow him to pick a side too early. Otherwise the emperor would be very angry. Thus, it was not convenient for him to partake in this feast of the palace treasury. Under the protection of the guards, he walked out of the front door of the Jiangnan governor's manor. Xueqing unconsciously turned his head and looked at the signboard in front of the manor. His eyes were dazzled by the newly risen sun. A powerful sense of unease welled up in his heart. The emperor's actions these years had become increasingly strange. Everyone under heaven was looking at Jingdo and guessing at the future situation. For the Qing court, this kind of turmoil was definitely not a good thing. If people's hearts were uncertain, what would the officials do? Your Majesty, what exactly are you thinking? The palace treasury opened. The merchants who had come to bid were already sitting in their rooms waiting. Fan Xian, who was in charge of this matter, was still leisurely drinking tea. The person drinking tea and conversing with him was a eunuch from Jingdo. The palace treasury was the property of the royal family. According to the rules, it had to be jointly supervised by Taichang Temple and the internal court. Since Fan Xian himself was a junior official of Taichang Temple did not send anyone else to Suzhou for unnecessary matters. It also saved him a lot of trouble. However, a senior eunuch had come. At the same time, it was a big problem. Eunuch Huang speaks reasonably. Fan Xian placed the teacup on the table and smiled slightly. I also think that it is better to stay put than to move. Everything should be done according to the old rules. This senior eunuch from the palace had a very high rank. Otherwise, he would not have been entrusted with such a heavy responsibility. He had a fat head and big ears, and the fat on both sides of his cheeks were piled together. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he smiled insincerely and said, "With you in charge of this matter, I am at ease." This eunuch had always been deep in the inner palace. Although he knew of Fan Xian's great name, he thought that he had the emperor's orders and was not afraid of him. On the contrary, he had been in Suzhou for a few days, but Fan Xian had not invited him to his manor for a chat. This fact of being ignored made Eunuch Huang feel uncomfortable in his heart. In the conversation earlier, Eunuch Huang had brought Fan Xian a piece of very bad news. More accurately, he had passed on the Empress Dowager's verbal order for Fan Xian to manage the matter of the palace treasury. He had to follow the old rules and not mess around. Do not mess around? The old rules? Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart. Naturally, this meant that what should belong to the Ming family should belong to the Ming family. The rest could be slowly dealt with by himself. It looked like after the eldest princess returned to the capital, the Empress Dowager's heart ached for this young daughter. She had pulled a long face and used so much face. He knew that the Empress Dowager was warning him not to go overboard in his actions. He had to leave some living money for the members of the royal family to spend. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but want to laugh. He thought to himself that his emperor was known as the emperor of a generation. How come he was living more and more these years? How could he allow his mother and sister to send the family business to his son's manor? Of course, he knew that the emperor was not a simple person. However, he was becoming more and more confused as to why the emperor had created such a chaotic situation. If you want great governance, you must first create great chaos? He unconsciously furrowed his brows and said. What? Eunuch Huang asked curiously. Nothing, Fan Xian smiled and said. I have troubled you to pass on the edict. Eunuch Huang coughed and said with slight arrogance, It is because the Empress Dowager trusts a servant like me. Of course, I also have to thank Sir Fan Jr. for giving me this face. Fan Xian didn't reply. He only smiled and looked at Eunuch Huang's pig-like face. A moment later he said, Your face? Eunuch Huang was startled. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, Eunuch Huang in front of me, it is best if you put away that act. Old Yao, Old Dai and Old Ho know how to conduct themselves better than you. Eunuch Huang was furious but then immediately shocked. The three people Fan Xian mentioned were all powerful eunuchs in the palace. Although Old Dai had long lost power, other than the head eunuch Hongzhu who had recently been transferred to the Eastern Palace, Old Yao and Old Ho all had more face than him. Fan Xian saying this meant that even Eunuch Yao and Eunuch Ho had to be respectful in front of him. What did he think he was? Eunuch Huang was shrewd and restrained his anger. On the contrary, he smiled and replied, Sir is right. In his heart he looked down on Fan Xian. Such a young and powerful official who made enemies everywhere would probably not last long in the future. Furthermore, he was, after all, close to the Empress Dowager. His identity was a bit special. Fan Xian gave a not quite there smile and said, Eunuch Huang in Suzhou, it is best if you behave yourself. Eunuch Huang lowered his face and replied, Imperial Envoy, what are you saying? You speak in Jingdo, Fan Xian said darkly. What I hate the most is when someone uses the Empress Dowager to pressure me. Other people are somewhat afraid of you, but that does not include me. After you return to the capital, you can go around talking about it and see what kind of situation it will be. Eunuch Huang raised his head in anger. How dare an official be so disrespectful to the Empress Dowager? Did Fan Xian really not want his life anymore? Fan Xian had his reasons for saying this. With a cold expression, he swept out his sleeves and turned down a side corridor toward the main hall of the manor. Throwing down one last sentence, he said, Understand your own identity. Your surname is not Hong. Other than Eunuch Hong, what else was there in that chilly royal palace that Fan Xian feared? Fan Xian stood coldly on the stone steps in front of the main hall. The merchants in the rooms under the eaves on both sides quickly came out and bowed to him. His gaze stared straight at the main door. He didn't even glance at the Ming father and son in the Primus room closest to him. The large door was pushed open with a creak. A line of silent people slowly walked in. This group of people did not carry the usual aura of wealth and nobility of merchants, nor did they have the smell of officials. Instead, they were filled with a sense of bloodthirsty wilderness. When this group of people stood in the middle of the courtyard, it was like a few vicious wolves had suddenly appeared among a flock of sheep. There was a deer's tail on top of a cake. It appeared out of place and extremely abrupt. The person in the lead was the commander of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei. Xia Qifei was wearing a light green washed silk, but it still could not hide the iron-blooded aura on his body. Although his expression was calm, his slightly narrowed eyes still revealed a glimmer of excitement and nervousness. Xia Qifei raised his hands in a salute toward Fan Xian and said, "Sir Envoy, I have come late." "Not late," Fan Xian said coldly. "As long as you came, it's fine." The big merchants in Jiangnan often had shady businesses. Furthermore, they also relied on the power of the local wilderness in many places. As the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei actually had some secret dealings with these merchants and even the Ming family. Therefore, there were some people who had seen Xia Qifei's true appearance. Today, when he led his subordinates to stand in the courtyard, there were people with sharp eyes who immediately recognized him. The whispers gradually rose and gradually turned into countless exclamations of surprise. Even water bandits had come to the palace treasury to bid. The large merchants looked at Xia Qifei in the courtyard with faces full of terror. They couldn't resist glancing at Fan Xian standing on the stone steps. No matter how they thought about it, they could not understand this matter. Water bandits doing business? Then what would they, the merchants, do? Were they going to be mountain bandits? This world, ever since Sir Fan Jr.'s name had appeared, it seemed to have become strange and motley and difficult to grasp. What these Jiangnan merchants were more curious about was, even if Xia Qifei went around robbing, how could he gather so much silver? However, since these Jiangnan water bandits had already entered the door of the palace treasury, presumably they had at least paid the security deposit. If water bandits could make so much money, then why did they still need to work so hard to do business? Standing in the doorway of the room closest to the stone steps, Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and looked at the last person to enter the courtyard. In a quiet voice he said, "Who is this person?" "It should be Xia Qifei," Ming Lansher said next to his father's ear. "The leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. I've had some contact with him in the past, but I've never seen him in person. I don't know what's going on, but he's also here today to join in the fun." Ming Qingda's eyes narrowed even more. It was almost impossible to see the deep coldness in them. They only heard him faintly say, "Looks like this person is a chess piece the imperial envoy planted in advance." At this moment, Xia Qifei slowly turned his head and met the gaze of the master of the Ming family. He smiled slightly. His smile was very sincere, revealing boundless enmity and bloodthirsty desire. With Fan Xian's help, the seventh young master of the Ming family, who had his mother killed and his property stolen, finally had the opportunity to stand upright on the stage for revenge. The chapter is called The Door of the Palace Treasury. This is the name I thought of when I wrote the first chapter of the year of Qingyu. I've finally written this chapter. Feels very good, ha. To be continued. If you want to know what happens after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.